win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Astrolabe. It is a great and beautiful Tuesday. A Tuesday for the turbo farts, for the fart hogs. The sky is farting, and that's how you know America is here. How are you guys doing tonight? I have got myself a jam-packed show to get through here tonight. We are going to watch 3 separate, rather long videos with some commentary in between on more of Scott Bessent's territory. This podcast is turning into a Scott Bessent appreciation podcast, and I've got a number of things that I want to kind of present all together all at one time. So I've tried to streamline it as best as I can, and I'm going to try to the greatest extent that I can, do a little, I don't know, explain like I'm 13 maybe, to try to boil some of these concepts down into a little more of a straightforward way, and it'll help me with it as well, because there's levels of abstraction here that sometimes my brain gets lost in all of it. And so it's useful to try to bring it down and make it as simple and straightforward as possible. I'm talking about the treasury market. I'm talking about sovereign debt and some of the moves that Bessent is making and what they mean and don't mean. I spend an extraordinary amount of time sitting and consuming content from other people explaining a lot of these things. And my biggest issue is that I'm a retard. So I can understand something when it's being explained, but then I just can't, like, it just is like, it just wisps away from me. And so, like, I know the thing, I understand the thing, but then when it comes to actually using that understanding, I'm like, hold on a second, actually, I don't understand the thing. Okay, let me go back to the basics again. Let me start over. Okay, I think I've got it. I think I've retained it, but it's like the back end of it keeps dropping off. The further down the rabbit hole that I go, the more I lose the top of the rabbit hole. So there's one particular thesis about the world that I think is very operative here, and that is Brent Johnson's dollar milkshake theory. And I don't know how many people are actually familiar with it, but it's something that really informs a lot of my understanding of things when I'm trying to follow events and make sense of them. And so there's an interview that just came across my YouTube timeline that was just perfect, just so perfect, because he's being interviewed by this guy who has...
Found $10. Here's your cut.
Thank you, Donkey Bite. Thank you for the $10. Appreciate you. Let's put the chat away for now. We do have a sick little fellow. It turns out that man colds hit just the same no matter how old you are. When you're 5, the man cold knocks you flat. And the poor little fellow is absolutely knocked out flat. I needed an image here to hold some space so if tips and stuff come through, excuse me, they'll actually play. So yes, please do fund the Erickson cause so that we can provide for the care and well-being of this little guy. Can I make this? Can I do my get my Sarah McLachlan music playing in the arms of an angel? Is it arms of an angel or eyes of an angel? In the arms of an angel. Yeah, in the arms of an angel. Making the pity plea. Shout out, by the way, speaking of financing the show, shout out to Dr. Doom Guy gifting 10 subs over on Kick during the pre-show, and also congratulations to Tom Rickson getting a gifted sub, and it's good to see you, buddy. I was just asking about you the other day, wondering, hadn't heard from you in a while and wanted to make sure things were going all right, so it was good to see you. And then Pale Morning Dude with 500 kicks says Radiohead is overrated, and I'm not sorry. You can take it up with Thom. And then thank you for the $5 Donkey Bite. Please do tip your streamer. Tips.kingpill.com. I told Eastwood that he's very, very blessed to have such a good mommy who is able to just dote on him and wait on him. And they were sitting there like downing fluids and watching Outdoor Boys and stuff earlier, reading books together. So it's very good for Amy to be able to spend this time with him. And she's able to do that because you guys are so incredibly generous. So I'm able to do this full time, but that means I do depend upon you guys. So, and I will be missing a lot of shows here over the next couple of weeks because I will be traveling up to ChudCon. Make sure you guys have your ChudCon tickets. ChudConEvent.com. Labor Day weekend. So that is not this upcoming weekend, the following weekend. ChudConEvent.com. So let me think here. Where was I? There's a bunch of things that whole train of thought that interrupted me in that. Yeah, I don't remember what it was. So, yeah, dollar milkshake theory. We're going to talk about that, and it has a lot of relevance to what's going on here. I remember what I was saying. One of the videos just came across my YouTube timeline. Perfect timing because I've been listening to a lot of Brent Johnson recently, and he has. This is like the best interviewer imaginable. He asks the best questions. It's a really straightforward breakdown of the whole thing and applying it to current events. So I want to go through that with you guys. And then I want to play you guys the speech or the statement, public statement that Scott Bessent made declaring economic D-Day for Iran. I'm going to play that and go through it, and especially the Q&A afterwards. He was asked some interesting questions and gave some interesting answers. So we have a whole lot to get through today. Please do tip your streamer, tips.kingpill.com. Oh, I forgot to pin it in the YouTube chat. That is pinned. It is pinned in the Kick chat. And let's go. So first thing we've got today, a submission from the Sudaman. Yes, the timeline is full of blackpilling garbage. Yes, we have a long way to go and our leaders are usually failing, but make no mistake, 2026 is giving 1969 a run for its money in terms of pure aesthetic Kino events.
Soldier down. Fuck it, full $10.
Thank you, Donkey Bite. $10 for the downed soldier. We gotta make sure we show him this video. This will raise the spirits. Found it. Cameraman following the rocket was like the Panicans trying to get the point. It's so cool. What the hell? That is terrible CGI, man. How is it that real life looks more computer generated than
is a first. That is the softest splashdown we have ever had with the Starship there in the Indian Ocean.
Incredible. Remember how I said the other day that the video of the robot, the Chinese robot that went sprinting into the wall like Wile E. Coyote all over himself, and everyone will like point and laugh at that, like, oh, stupid Chinese robot, it made this tech that doesn't work. But that means they're going through those steps. I'd really like to see the American version of that. It occurred to me later on that this is the American version of that. That's what we're seeing with Elon. And in just about like every important cutting edge domain, technologically speaking. But this here, like, you know, they brought the rocket down and laid it down and it's all like on fire and like laying in the ocean and stuff. Yeah, but you see the trajectory here. Literally. You see the trajectory of where it's going to go. Yeah, watch a compilation of Starship and you'll see it. You have to be able to tolerate risk and have a single-minded focus on the future. And then you can iterate through failure on this public of a stage. Not very many people could get away with this. Elon can get away with this because he's Elon. And then there was this. Look at this. Katie Miller, the Mrs. Gigajoo here. Absolutely stunning image of SpaceX Falcon 9 by the Washington Monument this morning. Look at that. I can't even, like, you can't even fully capture it. You can't fully appreciate the image because it's vertical. You can't fully appreciate the image. But that's so freaking cool. And then Suda edited it. Suda-y. Intergalactic American Empire. Ah! It's happening. It's happening. And you're blackpilling? Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Now, we also have to say a big memory eternal for the Queen, Dolly Parton. They announced today that she has passed away. And though she is gone, she is immortal because of what she gave us.
If I should stay, I would only be in your way.
For they young chud.
Thank you, Lurch. $29 for the young chud. Appreciate you. Amy, if you're still listening, tell Eastwood that Lurch was thinking of him.
Go, but I know I'll think of you every step of the way. And I will always love you. I will always love you.
Oh, whoops. I wasn't sharing the screen so you could see the video of her singing.
I hope life treats you kind, and I hope you have all you dream of, and I wish you joy and happiness, but never for this. I wish you love.
He held on to it. Oh, he saved it beautifully. Oh. I decided I was going to play that on here because playing the actual Dolly Parton one I think will absolutely get the stream pulled down. But this one I'm hoping since it's some slants, I'm hoping maybe the DMCA thing won't kick in for them. If you guys like that, you should check out a guy named what's his name? Dimash, that's his name, right? You are, yes, Dimash Kudaibergen. He's from Kazakhstan. You are wholly, if you don't know who he is, if you haven't heard him before, you are wholly ill-equipped for what you are going to experience when you look that up. It's Dimash, Dimash. He is an alien. But yes, R.I.P. to the Queen. Now, we had a huge win yesterday that actually happened before I went live, and I didn't even see it. Oh, wait a second. Tom!
I am Will. Infiltrating Antifa has required comms discipline. Please buy Eastwood some treats.
Thank you, sir. Look at that. We got Patriots truly in control. They're behind enemy lines, maintaining comms discipline. Good for you, sir. You stay safe out there. So yesterday I showed this tweet from Christian Hines. Just a series of generational wins after another. Insider Wire, just all the we got like totally dopamine dumped yesterday. And what I hadn't realized is that the Homeland Security account quote tweeted his tweet. And with this meme, did you remain loyal? This alone would be really freaking cool. We've got DHS retweeting Christian Hines, one of our guys, talking about loyalty. But there's another layer to this one. It's even better. Look where they got the meme. Boys, DHS is frontierism posting about loyalty. Did you remain loyal to your president? Anon. Thank you, Emperor Atreides. Did you remain loyal? Or did you tune out? Your president is watching. He's got a list. He's putting together a list. Yes, they are deep in the lore. Our guys behind enemy lines. Those enemy lines are quickly disappearing. It's just our lines. We're building borders in the federal government, kicking out commies and shit libs. One of my favorite depictions of current events, Trump versus the Panicans. That's me right there. That's me. I'm MAGA. That's me when I'm watching my president do this to the Panicans. Shout out to MAGA Jay Cutler, another powerful mutual. Go follow him. For the first time, the U.S. immigration system is being weaponized against immigration itself. You heard that correctly. For the first time, the U.S. immigration system is being weaponized against immigration itself. The Trump administration has restricted legal migration while stripping legal status and halted entry programs that were abused while activating enforcement powers that have never been used. If you've been listening to The Lab on a regular basis, you are well aware of all of this stuff. But we're going to keep talking about it. You never know when someone new shows up. You must be put through the dunk tank of propaganda regularly. Trump's immigration policy, things never been done before, from Prowler at Dursum _, one of our great patriots, great patriot poster propagandists. Unprecedented actions from January 2025 to August of 2026. Actions taken by the administration that's not doing anything. Alien Terrorist Removal Court, first case ever filed. Created by Congress in 1996, sat dormant for 30 years, never received a single case. First case was a green card holder, mother of ISIS supporter, per CBS News and Acting Attorney General Blanche. Judge contempt penalty powers, proposed, not yet final. DOJ proposes letting judges fine attorneys for contempt, authority granted by Congress in 1996, never activated. Fines against immigration attorneys and illegal aliens. First time ever. So immigration attorneys and illegal aliens now have to take into consideration that they are putting themselves subject to these sorts of fines. $255,000 versus a Star Wars name attorney, and then about $500,000 versus another Star Wars name attorney. Civil penalties. Separately, 103,000 plus illegal aliens hit with fines, first ever. And this is per DHS and an actual statute. First mass delegalization. 1.8 million stripped of status. That's TPS plus CBP1 plus CHNV ended. TPS was 13 countries, including Haiti, Venezuela, Honduras, and more. CBP1 app, parole, is ended. And then CHNV, which is Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. They had their own special, what would you call it, like refugee programs. 175,000 plus visas revoked, an unprecedented pace. Trump, too, has revoked more visas in 18 months than the U.S. did in the 14 years from 2001 to 2015. And the State Department is targeting even more now. So between George Bush and Donald Trump, there were fewer visa revocations than there have been in 18 months. And the State Department is ramping it up. Denaturalizations have climbed while naturalizations have collapsed. These are both modern era firsts, in other words, post-1965. Denaturalization, 123 filed in 18 months versus 305 in 27 years. Fewer than 150 denaturalization cases were filed between 1967 and 2017 were successful. So naturalization processing is down about 75%, the sharpest cut on record. Then dominating the border, record low refugees, asylum all but gone. Both programs have been gutted. Refugees down about 90%. 99.9% is white South Africans. For asylum, legal entries are down 99.9%. 93% plus have been denied in U.S. courts. 6 national defense areas established where illegal entry is punished. Arizona, California, New Mexico, Texas border. The military charges trespassers and detains migrants. DOJ prosecutions soar 4x against illegal entry, nearly 2x for re-entry. Immigration cases make up 37% of federal sentences in 2025. 37% of federal sentences, of all federal sentences in 2025, were related to immigration cases. And then the public charge rule was revived and expanded. Officers now weigh eligibility. In other words, are you going to cost the country more than you bring to it? State Department expanded public charge review to visas worldwide. DHS rescinded Biden restrictions, and USCIS to weigh risk factors and benefits use or probability. So are they going to be on the public dole? Or what's the likelihood that they would wind up on the public dole? And then all legal immigration categories have been restricted simultaneously. This is not just deportations. This is above and beyond deportations. We are getting mass deportations and literally every single legal immigration category restricted. We were promised mass deportations. We've gotten much more. The diversity visa was paused. H-1B, F-1, J-1, and OPT have new hurdles. Visa freeze on 75 countries being litigated. Travel ban on 39. Public charge enforced for the first time in a century. Refugee program near eliminated. Green cards halved. Naturalization collapsed. All residents under review. USCIS applications down 33.6%. Cases completed down 40.8%. Curtis Morrison of Red Eagle Law says, in Forbes, New York Times, says, the focus is really on eliminating legal immigration. Massive. Self-deport before we send you to a random country that is much worse is exactly the message the Trump administration should be sending. Yes, Mr. McIntyre, yes, correct. That is exactly the message they should be sending. It's very good. This is the message they've been sending.
Y Yasmani, no pueden salir de ese edificio. You cannot leave that building.
This is ICE deported a Cuban man and other migrants to Africa.
Wow.
We're stuck.
Nos tienen aquí detenidos en un centro. No podemos salir, no tenemos documentos, sufriendo por nuestra familia. En un continente que no conocemos.
We're suffering and missing our families in a continent we don't know. There's violence. We can't get out of here. The U.S. never gave you notice that you were being sent to Africa?
The U.S. never gave you notice that you were getting sent to Africa.
I learned after 5 hours on the plane that we were going to Africa.
Were you deported because of a criminal record?
No criminal record.
Where are the other deportees from? Nepal, Vietnam, Cuba, Ecuador, Honduras, and Africa. And Russia too. Pero ninguno de ustedes es de ese país. None of you are from that country.
No, ninguno somos de este país.
None. Están atrapados. You're stuck.
Estamos atrapados en este edificio.
Shout out to CBS News, getting the word out for us. This is what, if you do not self-deport, you could wind up like this guy, stuck in the Central African Republic with a bunch of people from a bunch of different countries, none of which are the Central African Republic, with no money and no, you can get CBS News' attention, so I'm sure they're going to be fine, but that's not going to be the case for every single person. Who wants to sign up for that? You could go to the federal government right now and you could say, hey, I'm here illegally. I would like my check and my plane ticket. And I'm going to go back to the home that I know. Or at least something that I have connections to. I'm going to choose where I'm going to go to. Or you could be trying to do that with no flight and no check from BFE Africa. Not doing anything. How do you possibly come to the conclusion that we have been sold out on mass deportations? Incredible. Here's a Pete Hegseth appearance.
Every dollar squandered on redundancy or bureaucracy or waste, it's an insult to you, the taxpayer, and it's a theft from warfighters. This is a new department with a new focus on our core mission, where we're restoring the warrior ethos, and that means a focus, an unrelenting, uncompromising focus on lethality. It means no more DEI. It means no more trannies, just training. It means colorblind, gender-neutral, merit-based, back to basics, across the board, no matter if you're carrying a rifle or you're working on the plant floor.
You remember where we were just a couple of years ago? Just a couple of years ago. Just a couple of years ago, we were almost at where Europe is now. Now we have the war secretary giving a speech live on Fox News saying, no more trannies, just training. Now, a cynic might get hung up on the fact that it's gender neutral. And I can appreciate that. Like, obviously, we don't want a gender neutral, but that's actually very effective speak for it's like political speak for covering a policy where you weaponize meritocracy against gender neutrality. And if you make it strictly meritocratic and gender neutral, then the actual outworking of it will be the natural order. But that falls to leadership, ultimately, which is why it'd be very good to have, I don't know, maybe like continuity in leadership. Yeah, this is how you get white men back in power. So true, Ninja of Spades. Merit-based means men almost exclusively, yes. And if you remember about, let's see, I remember it was when I was in Washington, because I remember where I was walking when I was listening to it. He gave that speech where he called like all of the military leadership in and talked to them about all the new physical fitness standards and all of that. So that was October of 2025. Yeah. At that time, he made comments along these lines that I recall hearing that and being like, okay, I see what he's not just using merit-based as a way of undermining the gender neutrality thing. He's like openly doing it. He's like self-consciously doing it. And then here's this one, which will give us a nice little segue into our next segment.
American battlefield readiness runs through our small businesses. It always has. The vehicles, the planes, and even rifles in our warfighters' hands rely on a supply chain of hundreds of specialty producers. A Patriot missile depends on hundreds more. These are the local factories, the shop floors, and the labs forging the arsenal of freedom. And that's why today, the Department of War and the Small Business Administration are establishing the Smaller War Plants Commission in the spirit of the historic Smaller War Plans Corporation, surging capital and expertise to support the innovative entrepreneurs, manufacturers, and workers every day expanding America's defense base. Our message is clear. President Trump is ending the era of dependence on foreign supply chains and our adversaries. This historic long-term commitment will reinforce the industrial depth that stands proudly behind the strongest military on earth. When we back the businesses who supply our forces, we outbuild, out-innovate, and overwhelm any adversary. We are transforming industrial capability into generational battlefield advantage.
You realize what this is? This is the announcement of federal financing and subsidizing of small businesses developing military, like anything that would be of use to the military. This is an opening of credit targeted directly at an underserved, productive segment of the economy.
Advantage. And in doing so, we will deter conflict, preserve peace, and ensure that no adversary tests American strength.
Secretary Hegseth has established the mission. America must build what our military needs when it needs it, right here at home. That's where our most innovative, agile businesses come in. The SBA is proud to join the Department of War in establishing the Smaller War Plants Commission. This name reflects the SBA's predecessor agencies formed during World War II and the Korean War that backed the mission-critical small defense manufacturers that armed American forces through victory.
This is President Trump telling the Gundo boys, I got you. I got you. This is patronage.
That mission continues today as we back the small manufacturers that comprise 70% of the defense industrial base. Today, the SBA oversees nearly $500 billion in a small business portfolio, and we're bringing our proven capital access and investment model together with the Department of War. Our joint mission will supercharge funding to those building our supply chain, tooling up, expanding, innovating, and hiring to deliver capability to the warfighter. The era of offshoring the production of power projection to our adversaries is over. Thanks to President Trump and Secretary Hegseth, the world's strongest military will be backed by the world's most nimble industrial base, offering our warfighters asymmetric advantage and our nation peace through strength.
Thank you and all the small businesses you help empower every single day for making it happen.
Well, it's my honor, and it's an honor to serve alongside you. I'm grateful for all you do for our nation and for our warfighters.
Likewise. All right, let's sign it.
Thank you.
What a great initiative.
I can't decide if I think the end of that was better left in or not. But I mean, hey, I guess if you have to have an official record of them signing this paper, this is the productive deployment of credit into chud-aligned sectors. This is the American economy beginning to right-size itself under the leadership of President Trump. And what do you know? U.S. manufacturing activity is rapidly expanding. The Philadelphia Fed Manufacturing Index of Current Business Conditions rose 6 points in August to 47.4, its highest since April 2021. This is a survey of manufacturers across eastern and central Pennsylvania, southern New Jersey, and Delaware. Where my New Jersey Labians at? Where my Pennsylvanian Labians at? At the same time, the index of future business conditions jumped 39.2 points to 73.6, its highest level since the 1980s, and its largest monthly increase on record. Meanwhile, the index of future new orders soared 30.9% to 66, its highest since June of 2021, all while the 6-month forecast for capital expenditures surged 18.1 points to 48.2, its highest since the 1970s. The U.S. manufacturing sector is gaining momentum. Surprise, surprise. Now, we're gonna talk about Scott Bessent's economic D-Day, his declaration saying anybody who's trying to do business with Iran needs to stop now, or you're getting thrown out of the dollar system. Word for word, basically what he said. We're gonna get to that here in just a minute, but I think there's been a lot of hullabaloo about this buyback program that Bessent has just doubled recently. And is this yield curve control? Is this stealth QE? This is Bessent panicking. I saw Stan Druckenmiller wrote a scathing article, and I just this stuff is beyond me to I don't have any expertise on the actual mechanicals of anything that they're talking about. But if I'm just reading the players on the board here, Stan Druckenmiller is the mentor of both Kevin Warsh and Scott Bessent. So as soon as I see that Stan Druckenmiller went and wrote this big scathing article, but he also very obviously used AI to do it, I'm like, all right, there's some kind of game going on here. This is a narrative shaping operation happening with Bessent and others in his orbit. Maybe Stan Druckenmiller is the it's like the counter to George Soros. We're in a dialectic trap between Druckenmiller and Soros. But I think to understand exactly what's going on, I have two videos here with Brent Johnson that I'm going to play for you guys today. The first one is kind of a like take that whole situation that's happening right now. You've got Iran, you've got Bessent, you've got stablecoins, you've got the Treasury buyback program, and you've got Warsh coming in, and all the stuff related to the financial markets, price of oil, all that. Just put a pin in that for about, I don't know, it's probably be about an hour or so as we go through this first video. And this is an interview. This is the Tall Oaks podcast. I'd never heard of. Yeah, you can't show it on the screen. I'd never. Yeah, here we go. Never heard of him before, but this dude can interview. He is one of the best interviewers that I've ever heard, and he absolutely pulls the best out of Brent Johnson. So it's the dollar milkshake theory explained. And this is why all of the libertarian free market and the Fed, the dollar is a Ponzi scheme, abolish fiat money, all of these people, the dollar milkshake theory is the thing that just rug pulls them. Their entire, it's not so much, we were talking about this in the Discord yesterday, it's not so much that they are wrong in the way they talk about, like the Luke Gromans of the world. They talk about how, the dollar is going to inflate away, and then, everybody's going to leave the dollar, and there's going to be some alternative set up, and the United States is going to get left in the, they're to even begin going down that pathway, you have to have a fundamentally broken model of the world. You don't actually understand what the dollar is and why. Well, that's what this video, this first one here, is for. Explaining just what the dollar is and why it doesn't care what you think about free markets or the value of gold or any of that sort of stuff. And I think that the dollar milkshake theory is the best explanation of it. So here we go. This is Brent Johnson on the Tall Oaks podcast. We're not going to listen to the entirety of this one. I want to leave some of it so you can go over to his channel and listen to the rest of it, and then go listen to a couple of his others, because that's what I did. But here we go. The dollar milkshake theory explained by its creator, Brent Johnson, CEO of Santiago Capital.
Yeah, that the dollar losing purchasing power is evidence of its failure, I think, is to misunderstand the design of the system. That's a feature of fiat currency. It's all part of the same system. Is that a U.S. debt crisis is a global debt crisis. There is no such thing as a U.S. debt crisis that the rest of the world gets to avoid.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tall Oaks podcast. I am super excited for today's episode. I am joined by Brent Johnson, the CEO of Santiago Capital. For any of you guys that have been active on social media in the finance space, you might know him as the dollar milkshake guy. I say that very endearingly. I think it's a really interesting theory, and it's what Brent has somewhat been known for. So, Brent, you've been gracious enough to give us some of your time today and tell us a little bit, talk to us about the U.S. dollar. It's something that's so misconstrued or misunderstood. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Trust Plan Star says, finance people outside of a few are almost as bad as politicians. And when I first read that, I thought it said, finance people outside of a Jew are almost as bad as politicians. Yeah, that's the dollar milkshake theory in a nutshell there. The rest of the world goes down before we do. Yeah. So when people talk about like, oh, the U.S. bond market is going to collapse and everyone else is just going to pivot to something else, it's like, you don't realize what the U.S. bond market collapsing would mean for everyone else. There would be no pivoting. There would just be explosions.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to talking to you, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions and provide a little value to you and your audience. I am kind of known as the dollar guy, which I think is kind of funny in some ways. I really came up with the whole dollar milkshake theory as a way to explain to my clients what I thought was going to happen in the years ahead. And I've always worked with individuals and families. My clients have typically not been other institutions or other money managers, and so I've always had to try to figure out ways to take sometimes complex ideas or subjects and kind of boil them down into a way that I thought my clients would be able to understand.
Okay, hold on. Sorry, Brent. We need to take a brief foray back into the immigration conversation, because Appeal to Pragmatism just posted this. The Trump administration has issued a pause on all visa appointments for all applicants in all countries for now. The worldwide moratorium will be in place while the State Department trains officials on how to identify and filter out foreigners who may pose a public charge risk to the country. This comes after a federal judge blocked the 75-country visa processing freeze, which blanket banned high-risk nationals. Holy shnikes! The Trump administration has issued a worldwide visa moratorium indefinitely. Unless there's like some fine print here where they said it'll be up for like 3 months or something. Shit, there's period. Literally having it paused for a week would be a massive win. Now it's just indefinite. Yeah, we're going to be training people, so just sit tight. Give us a little while. You know how government is. It's really slow and inefficient, and it's going to take us a while. We got to get through all the, got to take care of the lowest common denominators, so you really got to work hard with them. Incredible. Yes, Slutty Milk, it's a total and complete shutdown until we figure out what the hell is going on. They literally did the thing. Posters are truly in control. Incredible. Thank you for tagging me on that, Ben Shapiro on 2X. Incredible. Oh, there's gonna be a hootenanny about that one.
And because many of them are very intelligent, very smart, but they're just not finance professionals, and perhaps they don't understand all the lingo or the different programs, and don't necessarily like reading monetary policy. And so the milkshake theory was really a way for me to explain. And I started this back in 2018, 2019. And essentially what it said was that I thought after 40 years of interest rates going lower, all the debts in the world had gotten to a size where I thought they were going to start going higher. And because of all the debts in the world, that would cause a number of problems. I also thought because interest rates would start going higher, that would pull capital into the United States and into the dollar, and it would make the dollar stronger versus its fiat peers.
So you see here, he's following like the order of events. Like if you're sequencing this out, like how is it going to play? Once one thing starts happening, how did the other players in the system, how did the other nodes on the network respond to that thing that happened? Well, if rates start rising in the United States, you're actually going to get money pulled into the United States. Because what is the rate? The rate is the money that you're being paid. It's not directly that simple, because if rates are rising too fast, then it's kind of a signal, oh, there's maybe an instability, so you got to pull out. But then it's like, oh, here's the thing, is that if the United States starts getting unstable, there's nowhere else to go. Because as soon as the United States starts getting unstable, everything else exponentially gets more unstable. Because the whole rest of the world is built on the backs of the United States.
But I also thought that it would cause U.S. equities to go higher, because I thought as those flows from around the world came into the U.S., it would push prices higher. And I thought gold would go higher as well, because even though that flows are coming into the dollar and the dollar may be rising versus foreign currencies, it can still be getting debased over time. And I thought that would start to play out in a bigger way. And we didn't get the crisis that I thought we would have. We got close a few times, but we didn't get the crisis. So from an event perspective, the theory turned out to be wrong. But from an asset performance perspective, it turned out to be right. And so that framework has really helped me understand and my clients understand.
Tyler!
The Bitcoin maxis also need to realize that Bitcoin won't explode because of the dollar's collapse. Bitcoin will explode because of asset reallocation.
Yes. Actually, what Bitcoin is doing for the dollar is, but Trump even said this directly, word for word the other day. He said Bitcoin has been really useful to take some pressure off of the dollar. Yeah, we're definitely going to be getting some more Bitcoin. Bitcoin is actually going to help reestablish the dollar as the reserve currency. That's going to be the service. The dollar is going to be a layer on Bitcoin.
And what's happening, why it's happening, you know, the associated volatility that's gone with it over the last 5 or 6 years, 7 years now, and where we think it's headed from here. So it was you know, that sucking up of capital from around the world was my way of saying the US dollar and the United States was going to drink the rest of the world's milkshake. And so that was the genesis of that idea.
It's going to suck up their liquidity.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So like really quick, when people talk about the dollar, like I hear all the time when I'm talking with kind of the general public, people say like, oh, the dollar's crashing, you know, and what they're sort of meaning is like from the inflation angle, right? Like, hey, it's the dollars in my pocket are buying less groceries at the grocery store today. The dollar's crashing, right? Or look at the value of the dollar over the last 150 years, you know, and you know, it's totally crashed. It's worthless. It's worth 99, you know, 1 cent on the dollar originally. And they're thinking about that, like that hard back, you know, the greenback in their pocket and what it can buy for them in the grocery store today, right? Or at the gas pump or whatever. What is a dollar more, you know, when we say in this conversation, the dollar?
Jeff!
It's no longer we are going to win. Now it's we are fucking winning patriots.
Yes! It has been decided. Jeff has declared it. And he put $47 on it. So until someone wants to outdo him, it has been declared. We are fucking winning.
Nigga, we ride with Donald Trump over here, nigga.
By the way, the Rapid Response account on X just posted the overtime goal that the United States scored against Canada earlier this year, in hockey. So we've got a little shit talking happening between the nations. I've got some stuff on everything with
homos.
Thank you, Nevsky. I've got something on everything with the Mark Carney business, because that's also very much tied in with all of this. And I've got some great commentary from Matt Dines on that. But I'm like, I gotta get through one set of these things at a time. But there's so much that's happening right now. Everything is happening. You know why? Because we are fucking winning. All right, now he's asking this very, very good but kind of extended question. So let me go back to the beginning of it again.
So like really quick, when people talk about the dollar, like I hear all the time when I'm talking with kind kind of the general public, people say like, oh, the dollar's crashing, and what they're sort of meaning is like from the inflation angle, right? Like, hey, it's the dollars in my pocket are buying less groceries at the grocery store today. The dollar's crashing, right? Or look at the value of the dollar over the last 150 years, it's totally crashed. It's worthless. It's worth 99, 1 cent on the dollar originally. And they're thinking about that, like that hard back, the greenback in their pocket and what it can buy for them in the grocery store today, right? Or at the gas pump or whatever. What is a dollar more, when we say in this conversation, the dollar, what does that really refer to?
Yeah.
It's just a perfect question. Yes. This was a part of what listening to Britt Johnson was, and Tom Luongo and a number of other people, was the thing that got me thinking in terms of the dollar as a system, and then the dollar as the actual currency itself. And this is one of the things that the dollar bears. This is the thing that they don't disambiguate for themselves in their analysis. They don't recognize the characteristics of the dollar system. They just view the dollar as if the dollar is one currency among a bunch of other currencies. But all the other currencies effectively exist in relationship to the dollar. The dollar has a different relationship to all the other currencies than any other currency does. This is what being the reserve currency is. And where I think this sort of thing gets really hard for people to track with is that you're having to try to measure multiple different variables at the same time that are all interdependent. So you have like your day-to-day personal experience is my dollar isn't buying me more things. My dollar is buying me fewer things. That means my dollar is getting weaker than all of the things that I'm trying to buy with it. But you're probably not trying to buy other currencies. You're probably not regularly. You're probably not regularly trying to buy other countries' sovereign debt. Those are things that you're probably not trying to buy, but those things are really, really important. So you don't have a proper understanding of the relationship. You, the dollar bear, hypothetically, that I'm speaking to, you don't have a proper understanding of the value of the dollar with respect to all of the biggest, most important financial transactions that happen that are all denominated in the dollar. So yes, the dollar may be getting weaker for you with respect to your groceries and your gas and your, whatever else. But there's things downstream from the dollar that are getting weaker faster.
Yeah. So, well, it honestly refers to both, and let me tell you what I mean. But specifically, when I talk about a strong dollar associated with the dollar milkshake theory, I meant relative to other fiat currencies in the world. And this is specifically why I say those who say the dollar is going to crash, the U.S. dollar is going to lose its global reserve currency status, the rest of the world is going to reject the dollar and start using something else. That is completely wrong. And I've tried.
Tikon!
Having a cold as a man is 10 times worse than childbirth. I still have post-cold depression from the last one. Godspeed to the young patriot.
Yes! So true, Tikon. So true. I told Eastwood today I had to talk him through it for a little bit because he was having a rough go of it. And I said, don't worry, man. Like, it's going to pass. It's going to pass. But when you get a cold, it's going to knock you out. You're gonna feel like death, and it'll hit you hard. But don't worry, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. He told Amy last night. He said, "Mommy, I'm so sick that I talk funny." He's very upset about his nose being stuffed up, which I can highly relate to. Thank you, Tikon.
Tried my best over the years to explain why that is wrong. The simple answer is because it's a relative game. There is despite all the problems that the United States has, and there is many, and we could spend this entire show talking about all the problems the United States has. But the reality is all of these other countries have the same problems that we do, and they don't have near the advantages that the United States has. And as a result, on a relative basis, the dollar, in my opinion, is going to dramatically outperform the rest of these fiat currencies. Now, having said that, you're absolutely right. But I should say many people in the financial media, when they talk about the dollar dying, they will often talk then about purchasing power, right? And that is a real thing. And that is not a bug. That is not a bug that will lead to the dollar dying. That's a feature of fiat currency. If governments wanted currency to hold its value, they would just use gold, or they would use some kind of a hard money, or they would not have a policy of it constantly expanding the monetary supply. But they don't want that. And so the idea that the
this is like you have to live in the world that is. You could talk all you want about the world that should be. Sure, it should be, but this is the one that is. And there is, let's say, quite literally an extraordinary amount of capital invested in the world that is. So if you want to move it to the world that should be, you're going to have to deal with what is. And if you want to move it very, very quickly, you're going to have to bring to bear as much capital as, at least as much capital as is already invested in the system. So when you come up with the capital that would outdo all the capital invested in the dollar system, then you could just say, hey, just switch over to this.
The dollar losing purchasing power is evidence of its failure, I think, is to misunderstand the design of the system. Furthermore, I think it's very important for people to not just sit in cash for that very reason. Debasement of fiat currency is a real thing. Debasement of the dollar is a real thing. All you got to do is look back through history and talk to your grandparents when they'll tell you that, candy bars cost a nickel or whatever it was, right? And now they're a couple bucks. So the loss of purchasing power of the dollar is a real thing. However, what I will say is that the dollar rising versus foreign currency.
I'll just say this, that I don't even necessarily, basically what he's saying is that when people say, oh, the problem with fiat currency is that it loses its value over time, they're just betraying their misunderstanding of how the system is designed, because the fact that it loses its value over time is actually a feature, not a bug. It's like a key feature to it by the nature of it being a currency, because of the benefits that you get from a currency that loses value over time. There are benefits to it, like liquidity and flexibility and adaptability and growth potential. There's a lot of things that can come from it. There's obviously lots of downsides. Congratulations. Welcome to life. There are downsides. But, what was I going to say? There was something he said right at the end here.
Of the dollar is a real thing. All you got to do is look back through history and talk to your grandparents when they'll tell you that, candy bars cost a nickel or whatever it was, right? And now they're a couple bucks. So the loss of purchasing power of the dollar is a real thing.
Oh.
However,
what I was going to say is I actually don't even necessarily think this is a bad thing either. And I'm thinking of this in a parable of the talents sort of sense. Like if you just take your capital and just sit on it, then it's going to degrade. You need to be refreshing your capital stack. It's like a motivator for industriousness. If you just camp out on it, then it's going to melt away underneath you. You can't store up your treasures like this. You're storing up your treasures in your day-to-day activities that are directed at ultimately refreshing that and building upon that capital stack.
However, what I will say is that the dollar rising versus foreign currencies on the global stage, that will end up causing a crisis, and that has caused several crises over the years. And in those crises, asset prices tend to fall and deflation overtakes inflation. That happened in 2020, happened in 2008, happened in 2000, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the point I've tried to make is, yes, you should absolutely have an investment portfolio.
Yeah, you think an inflationary environment is bad. Just wait till you live through a deflationary environment. Tyler says, people need to realize that a deflationary currency would require your wage to be cut over time, which would make people chimp out. Correct. Imagine that. Imagine selling people on a system that would require them to to over time be regularly taking a pay cut. Imagine trying to model out the future and plan for the future in an environment like that.
That sits in real assets and sits in stocks and has exposure to financial gain as opposed to just...
Yeah, trust plans are. And the debt that you have gets more expensive. So you keep taking pay cuts and your debt keeps getting more expensive. And of course someone will say, well, then you shouldn't have debt at all. And then it's like, all right, you know what? If you want to say that there should not be a time value applied to money, and people shouldn't be able to transact in money across time, I don't know what to tell you, man.
Just sitting in fiat currency that loses value. This whole debasement trade will not take place in a straight line, because as the dollar gets stronger versus foreign currencies, it will create the conditions under which these terrifying drawdowns. So,
like, you got to understand, to say there should be no debt is to say it should be illegal to lend money to people. It should be illegal for you, when your buddy's having a hard time, it should be illegal for you to lend money to him. No, you should actually be required to invest in him. I don't know how you're going to evaluate that investment. Like, how you're going to, is he going to be like a corporate person here that you can like invest in him and he sells shares in himself? Or how about you just lend him some money and he pays you a fee, a scaling fee based on how long you're out that capital.
Such as 2020, 2008, et cetera, come along. And in those drawdowns, if you're leveraged, or if you don't have some money on the sideline, or you don't have some kind of hedges against your asset portfolio, you can experience that severe drawdown, and perhaps you end up being a distressed seller. And so my point has been, you need to understand the way the system works. You need to understand that the dollar rising versus foreign currencies is actually a very important thing, and that is what will cause a crisis along the way.
Why the dollar? What drives your theory at a deeper level? Like, why would people want to get into the dollar? I mean, the U.S. government continues to just print money. Congress can't stop spending. So why would people want dollars?
Well, so there's two things. Sort of depends on which people you're talking about. And I'll explain what I mean. If you're talking about Americans have to use dollars, right? That is the currency under which we are required to pay our taxes. It's the currency under which you have to pay your mortgage. If you don't like the dollar and you don't think you should not have to use it, I would encourage you to go down to your banker and ask if you can pay your mortgage next month in euros, right? Or in gold or in oil. They're going to look at you like you're crazy. So Americans have to have dollars. Now, so then
show up to the bank with some gold bricks. Honestly, that might do it. There's a possibility that your bank might figure out how to make that work. I don't know exactly what sort of legal hoops they'd have to jump through, but like if you showed up with actual like gold bars, then gold coins or something like that, they might try to figure out how to make that work. But again, like you asked the question, why do people use the dollar? Why are people so invested in it? If we're going to try to figure out the value of this thing, approximate the nature of it, the character of it, well, so that we can then figure out, is that value going down? Is it going up? What does it mean for us if it goes up or it goes down? What things cause it to go up and down? We have to figure out who actually wants this thing. Why do people want it? It has all these terrible characteristics, and yet it seems like everyone in the world wants them and can never get enough of them. And if they stop getting them, and then it's the end of the world.
So then the question becomes, why would the rest of the world use dollars? Well, there's a couple reasons there too. Number one, even though the dollar may be bad, in almost all cases, it's better than their local fiat currencies.
Yes.
So if our dollar loses 5% versus inflation this year, and their currency loses 15%, they would be 10% better off by sitting in dollars than sitting in their local currency. So again, it's a relative game. But the other more important thing, and this is what I think most people don't know this, even people who have worked on Wall Street for a number of years don't typically understand this fully, is that there's two markets for the dollar.
Slutty Milk with a banger. He says it's like America is so bad, yet tons of immigrants try to come here all the time. Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's almost like these people share a base level premise about America, namely that America is bad, and so anything that America does in her own interests, anytime America tries to impose herself on the world, this is bad and immoral. It's almost like these are just different like offshoots of the same root level worldview.
There's a market inside the United States for the dollar, and then there's a market outside the United States for the dollar. That's called the euro dollar market. It's not euros. It's not the euro currency. It's just a definition for a dollar or dollar credit that's been extended outside the United States, and that balance sits outside the United States. And that market is much bigger for the dollars that sit inside the United States. So another popular figure that we will often hear is that the United States owes 40 trillion, right? Which is an incredible amount of money. And it's certainly a problem. And it's certainly something that we should be concerned about. But what often is not mentioned is that the rest of the world owes over $40 trillion. It's denominated in dollars, and they owe it to each other. They don't owe it to the United States.
So just to reemphasize that, there's $40 trillion in debt that everyone talks about, And then there's an over $40 trillion worth of dollar-denominated debt that sits offshore that nobody talks about. And that's all debt that they all owe to each other. Now, because those offshore dollars are exchangeable at par with onshore dollars, what happens in the offshore dollar market affects the onshore dollar market. But it's even more true the other way around. What happens in the onshore dollar market affects what happens in the offshore dollar market. And they've got over $40 trillion worth of dollar-denominated debts they all owe each other that have to be paid in dollars. Which means if it gets harder to get dollars, their debt gets more expensive. So, if something happens in the domestic dollar market that makes it harder for them to get dollars, and their debt gets more expensive, they get an increased desire for dollars. So they're actually trying to get more dollars. This is why the dollar milkshake is the United States will suck up all the other nations' capital markets just so they can get the dollars they need to pay all of their dollar-denominated debt.
And so if you owe somebody something in dollars, that creates demand for dollars because you have to get the dollars to pay that off. In the same way that you have to pay, your mortgage in dollars because your mortgage is denominated in dollars. If a Turkish shoemaker borrows money from France and it's denominated in dollars and that loan payment comes due, that Turkish business has to source dollars in the euro dollar market to make that payment. That creates demand. If that demand is not met, then you will get a default. And if a default happens, that creates a credit contraction. And in the credit contraction, money disappears. And that when money disappears, it makes the few money that remains go up in value. So it's because, and that euro dollar market is enormous. It's been around for a number of decades. It wasn't forced on anybody. They willingly did it themselves. And that is the money that is used to operate on the global stage. If oil trading takes place between Australia and Japan, it's done in oil, it's done in dollars. If Japan buys soybeans from Brazil, it's done in dollars. If France trades with South Africa and they buy copper from a South African copper mine, it's done in dollars. And so the dollar is an extremely important currency, whether we like it or not. And it's kind of, I kind of joke around, but water, for many people, water is kind of like or dollar is kind of like water to a fish. Most people don't even think about it. It's just there. Just because you don't think about it doesn't mean it's not important. And in fact, it's one of the most important things. And that dollar liquidity, that global dollar liquidity, if it ever starts to disappear, that's what causes financial crisis, whether it's the Asian currency crisis, whether it's the Chinese renminbi real estate crisis, whether it's the 2008 global financial crisis, whether it's COVID. All of that stuff is related to dollar funding.
Why would all these countries choose to use the dollar? Like, if I'm the Turkish shoemaker in your example, and I'm trying to borrow money from a businessman in France, why would I not borrow money in the Turkish lira or France is on the euros.
Yeah.
Okay. So why not euros? Why not lira?
There's a couple of reasons. Number one, they could, but often if you borrow in lira, there's not much demand for lira. Outside Turkey, there's not much demand for lira. So if you're going to borrow lira, you're going to pay a higher rate. So you can often, there may be some other contingencies applied to it as well. And it's just not, and the Turkish lira market's just not as big as the euro dollar market. So, and
this is like, I know that for some people, it's like they hear things like borrowing in lira or borrowing in euros or whatever. And it's kind of like, what does that even mean? But it should just make sense to you in terms of like, why would you want this? Would you rather have this stable, reliable, really nice vehicle to drive, or would you rather have this one that's kind of shaky and rattly and could just give out on you at any time? You're just comparing assets here.
And there might not be as many players willing to extend that funding to you in lira. So they could, but sometimes they won't. The other reason is because...
So like you could get an old beater and drive it around, and maybe there's some benefit to you in getting an old beater and driving it all around. But there's never going to be a situation where everyone just decides to go out of their way to get an old beater and drive it around.
Because of the growth of this euro dollar market means that buyers and sellers, borrowers and lenders, what they're trying to largely do is match up the liabilities on their balance sheet with the assets on their balance sheet, so there's not a currency mismatch. In other words, if you have a company and you have to pay your workers every month in dollars, it makes sense to keep your reserves in dollars, because if you had to pay them in gold and, the gold price went up, then you would have to spend more to go buy that gold to pay your workers. So if you hold your assets and your liabilities in the same currency, you remove that arbitrage risk. And this is where it kind of helps to understand history, because history is what led to the growth, the fantastic growth of this euro dollar market. It kind of goes back to the 1970s. Well, actually, I could make this very long, but I'll try to make it quick. Post World War II, the United States was designated as the global reserve currency, and it was backed by gold, and then all the other currencies pegged to the dollar. In the early 1970s, for various reasons, the United States removed that peg to gold. And then all of these currencies were just free floating for the first time in a very long time. And that created a lot of uncertainty. And that could have spelled the death of the dollar that many people now speak of. What happened relatively shortly after losing the peg to gold was that the United States entered into an agreement with Saudi Arabia where they would price all of their oil in dollars. And so when the rest of the world now needed to buy energy, and the OPEC then followed very shortly thereafter. And so if anybody on the global stage wanted to buy oil, and everybody needed oil or energy to run their economies, whether you were in Asia, Europe, Africa, South America. And so everybody needed dollars to buy the oil.
And he doesn't even touch on the Marshall Plan in this as well, which was the rebuilding of Europe after both the first and second, what are known as the First and Second World Wars, which was I like Tom Luongo. He describes it as, I think it was Tom that says they just dropped a money printer off in Europe and forgot it was there, and so it's banks in Europe that are issuing dollar-denominated loans, more or less, and then all of the derivatives that can be stacked and chained to all of that dollar-denominated debt, which is itself, I think it's like 4 quadrillion in derivatives. This is like above and beyond the debts. There's like the debts themselves, and then there's all of the derivatives that are stacked up on top of that. So the debts themselves are over 40 trillion, but then the derivatives expands all the way out to something like 4 quadrillion.
And so they started denominating they started borrowing in dollars. They started holding reserves in dollars. They started invoicing in dollars because energy was the most important input. And then over the subsequent 3, 4, 5 decades, that market just kept growing and growing and growing and growing to where now all of that market is largely credit. It's money that's loans that have been extended, credit that's been extended. And so now they're trying to match their assets with all of those huge liabilities that's been extended. And so when somebody makes a loan, on the one side, they're borrowing that money, but on the bank side, they're extending that money, and that's an asset. And so they want their asset to match to their liabilities. And since this is the biggest, deepest, most liquid market, they typically do it in dollars. And so and it's kind of like a network. Part of the reason people use it is because people use it. It's kind of like Facebook, or it's kind of like Twitter, or it's kind of like Apple iPhone. That's the network. And you don't have to use it, but it's just easier to use it because everybody else uses it.
Tyler says, damn, I wonder if all those wars in the Middle East involve Europe trying to retain control of the US dollar. What an interesting framing. Imagine if that was the case. And I'd imagine it also has to do with, like what built the so-called petrodollar at the time was it being tied to oil. Since then, oil, the oil industry and oil development and production and mining and all of that has extended out and covered a lot of the rest of the world. So that was like one of the vectors that the dollar used. If you think of the dollar as like a live entity, the dollar is woke. Then it piggybacked itself on oil to attain this network that he's talking about, and then that got supercharged by all of the dollar-denominated debt and all of the derivatives coming out of the Marshall Plan downstream effects, and that combined. So the euro dollar ate the petrodollar.
Or you use it because there's the most efficiencies. There's the most apps that are hooked onto it. It's so it's this growth of this network and economies of scale and efficiencies that have led to the growth of the eurodollar market. So going back, this is a very long way of going back to your question. Say they don't have to use dollars. They just often do because it's typically fastest, easiest, and cheapest. The problem, though, becomes when the dollar rises in value versus their local currency, they have that currency mismatch, and then they get into trouble.
Yeah. I think what I just heard you say was that like the euro is the green text message equivalent, and the dollar is the dollar is if you have the blue text.
That's a great analogy, actually. It's not that it doesn't work, but it just, everybody says, hey, look at this guy. He's got the green text.
Yeah.
This is, I'm going to mention this multiple times. This is a masterclass in interviewing, because you could tell that what's his name? Brandon Ducharme. You could tell that he understands all of this himself, but he's sort of playing the straight man and asking leading questions and then clarifying after he explains. This is take notes. The dude has 866 subscribers. He knows how to conduct an interview.
Yeah. Your group messages don't work right all of a sudden, Obviously, I'm kidding. So bringing up the petrodollars is something interesting. We hear a lot this speculation, like, hey, the BRICS countries, right? These oil producers, they're working on forming their own currency, and it's going to dethrone the dollar, and the dollar is going to lose its global reserve status, and the BRICS countries are going to replace it with whatever the heck they're going to call it, the BRICS dollar. I don't know.
Yeah.
How does that? Does the dollar have a moat there? Is that a real risk? Is that what would the impacts of that be or not be?
Yeah. So the first thing is that there's a number of different countries, different organizations, different alliances that are trying.
Just real quick, I'll say he just gave the analogy of like the network effect, like with Facebook or Twitter or something like that. Like, why do people use it? Because they use it with the dollar. Why do people use the dollar? Because people use the dollar. So to say there's a pretty strong parallel here between saying we're going to create an alternative to the dollar that everyone will start using instead of the dollar, is kind of like saying we're going to create an alternative to the internet that everyone is going to use instead of the internet. It's not exactly the same, although there's maybe more alike than not. But it kind of gives you an idea of what it would require. You're like, everyone is organized around this consensus, and you need to get everyone organized around this consensus. But how do you get people organized around this consensus when everyone's organized around this consensus? And the more you start to pull people over, then maybe something happens and they get pulled back. And it's like trying to build another social media platform or trying to build another internet. Sure, you can say we would love to have another one, but when it gets down to it, you actually have to move the players, and then now you're trying to herd people. One of the worst things you could possibly find yourself doing is herding people.
Is that a real risk? Is that what would the impacts of that be or not be?
Yeah. So the first thing is that there's a number of different countries, different organizations, different alliances that are trying to come up with a way out of this. I call it the euro dollar trap or the euro dollar prison. They don't like being beholden to the dollar. And so they're actively trying to come up with things, but it's much easier to say it than to actually do it.
Tyler says, or English, money and language are very similar. And that may even be a better analogy because if you're going to go use an alternative internet, people kind of like, all right, whatever, have fun with that. But if you're like, no, I'm actually going to, I'm going to only ever speak Swahili, and we're going to make Swahili be the new lingua franca of the world, then you're like, you can use Swahili all that you want, but you're more likely to just engender contempt or dismissiveness from anyone you try to engage with. You're not going to persuade them to your side. So trying to create an alternate internet may even be too neutral of an analogy. The English one, that's very good. The language. You're just going to piss people off when you try to do it.
It's actually really, really hard to do it in the same way that it would be hard to unseat Facebook or unseat Twitter or unseat Apple or whatever. It's not impossible, but it'd be very hard, and there's a lot of pain involved in doing it. So that's number one. Number two is let's pretend that let's say the BRICS did launch a currency. And let's say that a few people started using it. And they started using that rather than the dollar network. If they do that, that means they're going to be pulling liquidity away from the dollar network. And now that new liquidity would be migrating to this new system. The issue is that all of that debt that I talked about earlier, that 40 trillion plus in the euro dollar market, it's still out there. It still needs to get serviced. It still needs to get paid off. So now you have a situation where all those liabilities are still there, but now you have fewer currency units and less liquidity needed to service it. And in that environment, the dollar probably rises. And as the dollar rises, it puts more pressure on the rest of the world, and you get one of these currency crises or a credit crisis or a credit contraction, and it slows.
What he's describing here is that people attempting to leave the dollar system have the automatic knock-on effect of making dollar-denominated debts more expensive for everyone else in the system. So the act of some people moving away from the dollar system actually drives a majority of the other people further into the dollar system.
Slows growth. And this is part of the reason why anytime you've seen a country try to leave the system or, has some kind of a debt problem, it's because they're having trouble getting liquidity to service these US dollar liabilities that they already have. If there was a way, and here's the issue is, if those loans do get defaulted on, again, they're not defaulting on the United States. They're defaulting on other entities outside the United States. The solution would be if the whole world could agree that we are no longer going to use the dollar and we are going to use some other currency. And we all agree that we're all going to transition from using the euro dollar to this new currency on the exact same day, at the exact same time, at the exact same terms, and everybody agrees and nobody pushes back, then theoretically it could work. But anybody who's ever been in a meeting with more than 3 or 4 people knows getting everybody to agree on something, even what kind of lunch you're going to have that day, is not always easy. So rewiring an entire global economy and getting everybody to agree so that not one link in the chain breaks down. Because if one link breaks down, the whole chain breaks down. It's just, again, it's much easier to say it than to actually pull it off. And the other thing is, if that did happen, and there's been occasions where this has been happening, the United States will undoubtedly say, that's fine, but then you're no longer going to trade with the United States.
Yes.
And the United States is most countries' biggest customer. So I don't know about your business, but if I lost my biggest customer, that would hurt. If I lost my second biggest customer, that would hurt. And most businesses out there, if they lose their first or second biggest customer, it's going to hurt. Now, is that necessarily fatal? No. But I also don't know many companies that are happy to lose their first or second biggest customer.
You can see from this then where, I'm not going to say that either shorting the dollar or publicly casting doubt on the future of the dollar is treason per se, but you can see where you're starting to wander down that pathway a little bit, because you're talking about a consensus, and then disrupting that consensus brings material harm to the people in that consensus, and particularly the United States. The United States has a very vested interest in the maintenance of the US dollar. You might be surprised to learn this. So people who are openly trying to undermine confidence in the dollar are, therefore, openly trying to undermine the interests of the United States.
And the third thing is that if that didn't even work, my guess is that the United States would then try to enforce it using the U.S. military, right? And it doesn't always come to that, but sometimes it does. And I don't necessarily...
That was what Trump said. Someone asked him a question the other day about the bond market and what tools they have to enforce it. And he said something like, well, ultimately, there's the military. We're going to bomb the bond vigilantes.
necessarily like that. That's not necessarily the way I would choose to run the world, but I think that's the way the world is. And so the idea of moving away from the dollar, it's not that it's impossible, and it's not that it couldn't happen. I've come to the conclusion that it can't happen without things getting very volatile along the way. And in that volatility, I think the price of the dollar rises versus foreign currencies.
Yeah, I think what's interesting that you just said to me is, the U.S. is a lot of these countries.
By the way, if the price of the dollar rises versus foreign currencies, what that means is foreign assets become cheaper and cheaper for U.S. dollar holders to purchase.
Biggest customer in terms of trade, right? Obviously, we have this big, consumer-driven economy in the U.S., and we like our cheap stuff, right? It's actually, would you say that it's beneficial for these other countries to have a strong dollar so that we can, buy more of their stuff at a low price and have,
Arthurian.
Trump accounts, sovereign wealth fund, $19 trillion, FDI, data centers tax revenue, dollar milkshake, all of Europe's wealth, Money is free for Americans by 2040.
So true, Arthurian. Well, I would amend it to money is free for patriots. Of course, by 2040, patriots and Americans are going to be synonymous because all the anti-patriotic so-called Americans are going to be removed. Marco Rubio, get on it. What was the talking about the strong dollar, and I said so if so as the dollar gets stronger, when people try to leave the dollar system, the dollar gets stronger, which means other nations, like foreign assets, become cheaper, relatively speaking, to dollar holders. So basically, trying to leave the dollar system means that the rest of the world is on sale to US dollar holders, which means those who hold US dollars are going to start collecting these assets that are on sale, which means they're creating a bunch of new wealth that's denominated in dollars, with contracts and everything else built on top of it. So you see how the system becomes self-reinforcing to an extent.
That bleeds through. If we're able to, the dollar's strong, we can import the stuff that we're buying at a cheaper cost, and it actually helps offset inflation within the United States. Do I have that? Do I understand that right?
I think that's right to a certain extent. And I just wrote a very long paper a month or so ago, and I titled it The Band. And I titled it The Band because as long as the dollar stays within this range, the whole system works. And to your point, a strong dollar and a weaker local currency for these guys, it helps them. It allows them to sell their goods into that stronger dollar environment. And the fact that their currency is weaker makes their goods cheaper, and it keeps the system working. The problem is if you get outside of that band, problems start to happen. And the real problems happen when you get out to the top side of that band. There's a show.
When you start getting out of that band, one of the things that as the dollar gets stronger and stronger, it actually gets harder on American producers, because then American producers are trying to sell internationally. Even domestically as well, but especially internationally, it's difficult because the American goods priced in dollars are, relatively speaking, more expensive. So you don't want it all one way or all the other way. You have to keep it within this band.
A show called Landman with Billy Bob Thornton, who's the main character. And in this show, he's an oil guy in West Texas. And in one of the scenes, he explains to one of his coworkers why the price of oil needs to stay between, I think he said 85 and 65 or something like that. He said if it stays within that band, you're making the companies are making enough money that they can keep pumping the oil, pay their workers, develop more wells. And it's also not so high that the consumer gets tapped out and has to spend all their money to put gas in a gas tank. But if it goes above that band, now all of a sudden consumers have to spend all their money putting gas in their tanks, and they can no longer go out to eat, go to a movie, buy a new washing machine, et cetera, et cetera. So that causes problems. If you go below the band, then the oil companies can't make money. Production shuts down. They have to lay people off. And then when demand comes up again, the supply's not there. And then you go back into the band. And I think that's a very good analogy for the dollar. Again, if the dollar gets too strong, it causes these debt crises that I'm talking about. If it gets too weak, then what happens is those local currencies are now getting stronger. It makes their goods more expensive. It makes it harder for Americans to buy them. Americans buy less, and then those countries' revenues go down, and then they can't meet their debt. So, again, if it stays within this band, it works for everybody. But if it gets outside to either the upside or the downside, bad things start to happen.
How does the interest rate cycle affect this? All else being equal, like I don't love the.
Just real quick on the matter of oil prices. If you remember, for basically all of 2025, oil prices were really low. They even dropped down, or gas prices, were really low because oil prices were really low. Gas prices got as low, they were right around the $2 mark and hovered around the $2 mark for a while. And I even saw a few places, little one-off gas stations where they were down in the 187, I think was the lowest I saw. That's because oil prices were really, really low. But the oil prices, it was actually a problem that gas prices were that cheap, because it made it really, really hard to do all of the development that's required to scale up American domestic oil production. Because there has to be enough margin in there for it to be worth actually doing. So when the oil prices are that low, you're actually going to get a bunch of layoffs from the oil industry because they can't afford to keep all of these projects going. So the fact that oil prices are up where they are now, yes, it's made gas prices higher, but on a relative basis, $4 gas in 2026 is something like $2 gas in like 2010. So $4 gas is like, yeah, maybe it kind of hurts right now because of other variables, other things, but in terms of the strength of the economy, $4 gas is actually it's kind of a sweet spot. $3.50, $4, somewhere in there, because of what that indicates downstream from oil prices.
To either the upside or the downside, bad things start to happen.
How does the interest rate cycle affect this? All else being equal, like I don't love the idea of buying, German bonds, but if German bond, if the currency was relatively stable and I could get 15%, but it was 5% yields in the U.S., like, well, maybe I might want the German bonds. So how does that dynamic play through into the whole?
Well, so it's a great question, and it plays into it a lot, and I'll explain why. So number one, if their currency was stable, then you would absolutely prefer to receive that higher interest rate, right? But that's the question. Is the currency going to be stable? And if it's not, and you make 15% on the coupon, but you lose 20% versus the dollar, you've actually lost, right? So now you have to be pretty sure that the currency is going to be stable. That's
okay. So here, for a moment, I'm going to. I want this right here. So I made this. I had Grok make me this little graphic that I'll sit back here. If you guys wanted to screenshot it, if this is something that we were having a conversation in the Discord the other day, and I won't air anyone out, but there's people who are saying that trying to wrap their minds around bonds is like what even is happening here. It seems there's a bunch of stuff that's counterintuitive, and it's taken me. This is one of the things I was talking about, where it's just like every time that I get it in there, I'm like, okay, I've got it, and then it just disappears on me again. And so I'm like, okay, so when rates rise, that means the price goes down. When rates fall, that means the price goes up. So there's an inverse relationship between rates and price. But what does that mean? What are the rates and the price? What is that telling me? So just using US Treasuries as the baseline example here. A treasury is money that you are lending to the government. The government funds itself by borrowing money, by selling bonds, and you buy the bond, meaning that you lend money to the government for the duration of the bond. So the maturity would be the point at which, say you use $1,000, then in 10 years, you're going to get that $1,000 back. So I lent $1,000 to Slutty Milk, and Slutty Milk tells me, as the U.S. federal government, Slutty Milk tells me, in 10 years, I will give you back your $1,000. But I'm also going to give you a little bit of money in return for you lending this to me, and I'm going to pay you in ordered intervals. I think it's semi-annually. But it's either annually or semi-annually. But so those payments that happen regularly, those are the coupon payments, and that's what the rate refers to. So if the rate is 5%, then that means that you will make 5% of whatever the loan is that you gave to the government. The government will pay you 5% on a regular basis until they then pay you the last coupon payment along with the total amount that you lent them in the first place. Now, once those bonds are out in the market, then interest rates may rise or fall. And as interest rates rise and fall, then that changes the price in the secondary market for people who want to buy that debt from someone else. So maybe I want to now sell this debt to Homeless Nomad. And Slutty Milk is going to owe that money to Homeless Nomad. Well, how do I price this thing that I want to sell to him? Well, it's going to depend on what the coupon payment is. And so the price of the bond is going to change based on that. So these are the then arbitrage games that they're playing. That should be a just quick overview to understand what they're referring to when they're talking about bonds.
That's number one. But number two is if interest rates go higher in the United States, And let's just use right now. I mean, the 30 years over 5%, right? That's the highest it's been in like 20 years. And so if you can get 20% to own a U.S. Treasury, which the whole world needs and the whole world uses because of this euro dollar market that we've already talked about, and by buying a 10-year Treasury, you have now matched your liabilities with your assets, so you don't have that currency mismatch. The rest of the world is going to have to pay even more, or corporates around the world are going to have to pay a lot more in order to attract that marginal dollar to them to then take that corporate risk and that currency risk. And so by interest rates going up in the United States, it actually also causes rates to go up around the world, or it causes foreign corporations to have to borrow at a higher rate. Now, perhaps.
Yeah, so Ben Shapiro in 2X says the basic idea here is that you can always buy treasuries to get whatever their rate is. And the default risk is supposedly zero. So like, meaning if you think of this in terms of like I was lending money to Slutty Milk and I'm like evaluating how likely it is that Slutty Milk is ever going to pay me my money back. Not just give me the regular coupon payments, but give me the total money that I lent him when he said he was going to. Well, if you're evaluating the creditworthiness of the United States, you're saying, is the United States still going to be the United States and have the money to give to me at that point? And are they actually going to give me that money? And the treasuries are supposed to be the safest collateral because the United States never defaults on its debts. So then other bonds then are valued in comparison to treasuries. This is, I'm reading Ben Shapiro on 2X's tweet, or his message. Because you could always buy a treasury instead. Since that's like the baseline, everything else is priced off of the treasury. That's why then everyone's very invested in what happens to the price of especially the 10-year. Because a huge, I don't know what the numbers are, but a huge majority of financial transactions in the world are ultimately based off the price of the 10-year U.S. Treasury. Talking credit cards, mortgages, all sorts of contracts are all based off of that. So when that rate changes, it affects the cost of all of these other contracts for everyone else in the world.
Perhaps there's one or two companies out there somewhere that have sterling balance sheets and an amazing product and have, never missed a dividend payment in 100 years of history. And maybe those companies will be able to issue closer to the 10-year rate than others. But by and large, corporate bonds all over the world are priced off of the 10-year U.S. Treasury rate. So if the 10-year U.S. Treasury rate goes higher, global funding rates are going higher as well. And so it's not that that higher rates wouldn't be a problem for the United States. It absolutely would be. But it's not a problem for the United States in isolation while the rest of the world doesn't have to worry about it. And this is one of the points I've tried to make, is that a U.S. debt crisis is a global debt crisis. There is no such thing as a U.S. debt crisis that the rest of the world gets to avoid. It's all part of the same system. That is not the case when you reverse it. A Turkish debt crisis does not have to be a U.S. debt crisis. A French debt crisis does not have to be a U.S. debt crisis. Australia, Thailand, China, it doesn't have to be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. But the reverse is not true. If there is a U.S. debt crisis, the whole world is going to have a debt crisis.
I think, what's the old saying, right? When Wall Street or when Wall Street sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold.
That's exactly right. And then again, it's just the way the system is designed. It's not fair. It's just the way it is.
Well, that's not fair.
Right.
I want to expand this to equities. And
so, for example, if you have just say from that graphic that I made, there's the example interest rate that they use is 4%. So for every $1,000, which is what the bonds are typically priced in, $1,000 increments, you'd make $40 a year for every $1,000. And so then if you bought a million of them, then you would make $40 million a year. So it's very, very safe. It's going to constantly give you a yield. Now, if rates go up, you're going to make more from it. The newer ones are going to pay you more. So if U.S. rates go up, there's going to be a market for it. It's a matter of like how high it gets, to the point where like everybody is going to want to make 6%, 7%, 8% from the United States. But because as U.S. rates are climbing, everybody else starts freaking out. Everyone else starts breaking. The whole rest of the system starts breaking. So when Scott Bessent has to do things to manage the long end of the yield curve, he's not doing this because it's like, oh, America's in big trouble. No, he's like, I'm doing this so the rest of you don't fucking die.
International investments in portfolios. When I was in the graduate portfolio management class, they would teach and they would say, hey, every portfolio in the U.S. should have some element of international, equity exposure, because there's a lower correlation to U.S. stocks, and so it can dampen the volatility and increase the expected return over the long run. In practicality, I'm a little bit more of a tail risk guy, and so I look at it and say, okay, well, if in a good year I'm getting less volatility because I'm getting some non-correlation, but when there's a U.S. debt crisis, the rest of the world absolutely has a debt crisis, so I'm not actually getting the diversification when I theoretically want it the absolute most, right? What's the value of it long term then? How would you square those two different, angles, thinking through the lens of the dollar milkshake theory?
Yeah. So again, you have good questions. So this is very important, and this kind of goes to the heart of the way I have designed portfolios for my clients.
Okay, I'm gonna move on from there. So, this interview was actually just published a week ago. That's why I just stumbled upon it. But now this one is from Brent Johnson's own podcast himself. He does these little market reports. I think it's at least once a week. And they're must listens, absolute must listens on YouTube. He's Brent Johnson Milkshakes Pod. And this one here is understanding what the drunk man in the U.S. Treasury market means for your portfolio.
Buckle up, boys and girls, because Scott Bessent is back in the markets. And this time, he is not taking on a foreign adversary. And this time, he is not bailing out a foreign ally. This time, he is involved in the U.S. Treasury market itself. And that has big implications, not just for you, not just for me, not just for Americans, but for the whole world. And his actions this last week have gotten a lot of talk, obviously, and for good reason. But I think a lot of it has gotten taken out of context. I think a lot of things have been ascribed to it that it just is not accurate. And I think a lot of it is misunderstood of the size of what is actually happening. But it is not nothing. And it actually is important. And so what I'm going to do this week is kind of go through how I see things. I'm going to give you some context. I'm going to explain the size. And I'm going to tell you what I think is going on and why they are doing this now. But at the end of the day, as I say all the time, I'm going to let you make up your mind for yourself. But I'm going to try to give you the information on which to do that. So let's get started here. So first of all, I started on the wrong slide. Here we go. So Bessent stepped into the market this week on Tuesday morning, August 19th. He came out.
So one thing he's going to repeat quite a bit throughout this, and I just wanted to, I was thinking the same thing, and then I listened to this, and I was like, man, I'm just going to play this because he's going to explain everything. Obviously, I just learned the stuff what I can from him, so I might as well just play it from him saying it. But everyone freaked the hell out about this buyback that this buyback operation that Scott Bessent announced they were going to be doubling, and treated as that this is like a huge thing, and the fact that people melted down about it, despite it actually being a very, very, in actual like monetary terms, a relatively innocuous thing, which he's going to break down for us here. The fact that everyone freaked out is because I think the signal that was sent by the action mattered more than the actual nature of the action itself. In other words, Scott Bessent, when he announced this, he is announcing it to send a message, jawboning, not because of the actual functional monetary mechanics of it, though that is an element to it.
Came out and he made a surprise move regarding the long end of the U.S. Treasury curve. And he said they were going to at least double the long end buyback operations that were already in place. And when he said this, the 30-year Treasury rate fell 9 basis points almost immediately. And basically he was saying the new maximum size of a program that already existed at the $2 billion level was now going to $4 billion. And the interesting thing was that this ended up being, by the end of the week, a round trip. This is one of the problems and one of the challenges whenever monetary authorities get involved in markets. They end up getting tested. These things almost never happen one time in isolation. It almost always creates a dynamic in which they must defend over and over and over again. And whether or not this is the case this time will remain to be seen. But what is very obvious is that by the end of the week, the 9 basis point move that happened almost immediately was all given back, or at least almost all given back by the Friday close. Now, first of all, let's talk about what a buyback is and how a buyback works. I mean, it's essentially a reverse auction, a reverse Treasury auction, where the Treasury sets up a reverse auction. Dealers representing their clients, offer these bonds back to the Treasury. The Treasury takes the ones it wants and the size that it wants, and it gives cash back to whoever tendered their Treasury bonds, right? This typically happens through primary dealers because primary dealers are mandated by law to buy the Treasury auctions when they are sold. And so they are the ones that, do these reverse auctions as well. And when that happens, that debt is then retired. In this process, no new money is created.
And so the reason why those people might want to sell that back might want to sell those because they're holding it as collateral. So if the Treasury is buying them back, it's because someone's like, I don't want to hold this collateral anymore for whatever reason. Because I want cash, I need liquidity, I need to make payroll, I need to, I'm going to go buy something else with it. Or it's just the value of it has fallen so far because, 5 years ago, interest rates were so low. And so there's a lot of debt, which he's going to get to here in a minute. There's a lot of debt back then that's way underwater now that rates have climbed as high as they have. So they have, if they need liquidity, if they need to convert into cash, then they can just sell these and the Treasury will buy a select number of them that they choose.
It's a swap, 1-for-1. So this is not quantitative easing. Now, I know some people think it's quantitative easing. And again, this isn't nothing, but this is not quantitative easing because we're not contributing new money to the system. And this is not the first time that this has happened. This has gone on for 100 years at various different times. I listed just a few of them here. Back in the 20s, it was happening. It happened around the dot-com bust. Happened again, 10 years ago. And then Yellen started a new program back in 2024. And that is what Bessent is continuing. So Bessent did not come up with this on his own. He didn't invent this. This isn't Trump, out of the blue saying this is something new we got to do. What Bessent did was keep a program that was already there. And granted, he didn't cancel it, right? So I'm not saying that he's not involved here, but he didn't cancel an existing program. And what he did is he raised the ceiling on one part of it. And there's two different programs here that are two different reasons, stated reasons at least. We'll get into some of the unstated reasons. The stated reasons is both liquidity and cash. There's two different tools that are or goals of this one operation. One is a liquidity support buybacks targets off the run issues that have gone quiet. Number two is when they do these Treasury buybacks and it pulls yields lower, if it pulls yields lower, what it does is it increases the value of bonds that are on bank balance sheet. That matters for liquidity because, as we've discussed on the show many times, money in the system gets loaned into existence. The rise in the money supply that we've seen over the last couple of years is not the Fed injecting money into the system. It is a result of the banks loaning new money into existence. Two things happened in the span of 30 hours last week that almost nobody connected. Wednesday afternoon, the Treasury announced it would at least...
This is funny. This is his advertisement for his own stuff here. And he's got an AI voice of his own that's doing it. And you can tell that it's AI. It's kind of funny.
Double its buybacks of 10 to 30-year paper, $4 billion per operation minimum, trying to push its own long-end borrowing costs down. By Thursday afternoon, the bond market had erased the entire move. Every basis point the Treasury bought, gone. It means the market no longer believes the issuer can suppress the price of the thing it needs to sell. And when that happens, gold runs, which is exactly what it did to 46.26 an ounce. The Macro Pilgrim's Ledger is your weekly read on what actually moved, the key yields, the closes, the prints that mattered, broken down, connected, and pointed at the week ahead. Subscribe now on Substack to begin adding the ledger to your mental model of the global economy. Get started today. Visit research.santiagocapital.com. And the more collateral the banks have, the more likely they are, and the easier it is for them to inject more money via new loans into the system. Another reason is just...
So part of the reason he would do something like this, or part of the utility in a move like this, increasing these buybacks, buying these targeted treasuries, is because it frees up, number one, it frees up cash in the system, but it also changes the balance sheet profile of the banks and allows them to lend more.
There's just cash management on buybacks, which to smooth the cash balance. Now,
that lending could be probably just about anything. I'm sure the majority of it is going to be commercial, and then also like retail lending for mortgages and such. Ultimately, everything kind of trickles down through there.
Is the fact that the U.S. Treasury is doing this? It's not really unique. Corporations do liquidity and cash management and balance sheet management all the time. That's the whole point of corporate treasury offices. So again, this is not totally out of line to do this. I think sometimes, especially people who believe markets should be completely free, government should not be involved. And while I have enormous sympathy for that position, it's just not reality. So
yes, who cares what you believe in if you were to construct your little alternate reality exercise? Who cares what rules you would construct it upon? We have actual reality to deal with here. And the actual reality is that the United States government is a corporation, and it has a corporate treasury whose responsibility is to protect the assets of the United States, particularly one of the most important assets, which is the U.S. dollar system, which is made up of a whole bunch of different institutions and a whole bunch of different financial products and a whole bunch of different networked relationships. But absolutely then, the mandate of the Treasury, I don't care what your abstract principle about something called a government would be, the mandate of the actual Treasury that exists for the actual United States government is to manage the US dollar system. You are not entitled to dollars. The United States government is the filter through which you can access dollars, is the reason you get to access dollars. And you get to access dollars to the extent and at the price which the United States government determines.
This is not unusual for a government to be doing this, and it is not this a unique thing to the United States. But essentially, the liquidity supports off-the-run issues. They do it weekly. The cap is up to $4 billion. The goal is to keep each all the issues that are out there, all the different vintages, all the different maturities, to keep each of those different is tradable and liquid. And then the cash management is they're trying to keep coupons inside 2 years. They typically do it around these big tax states and a cap up to $12.5 billion. And again, they're trying to smooth the cash balance available to the Treasury so it doesn't get lumpy. And the varying cash levels at the Treasury don't send a signal that there's either some problem or some issue. So they're trying to smooth out, I guess, the volatility associated with the cash balance. So
that's another point. Is basically every single thing that the Treasury does is going to be, or is has the potential to be viewed under a microscope, and it can send massive economic signals that may be totally divergent from the actual reality. But they have to think about what signals are being sent each time they do something like that. So when they very, very publicly do something, that should be an indicator that at least a major component in why they are doing that is because they are wanting to specifically target their signal. Now, then downstream from that, you could say, are they targeting the signal toward actual reality, or are they targeting the signal toward what they want you to believe actual reality is? And that's a separate matter that you also have to parse. But either way, there's so many things that the Treasury does that aren't necessarily newsworthy. So if something becomes really big and newsworthy because everyone's talking about it, that means someone's ox is being gored or someone is actively goring someone's ox.
So essentially, this new cap raises it from $2 billion to $4 billion. The cap on any single thing is $12.5 billion on the overall, not just the long end operation. We'll get into the different maturities. And between now and November 4th, there's 7 of them. 7 of these opportunities. Now, some people say this is a political gambit heading into the elections. So, sort of, right? Like I don't think that's not a consideration. But these 7 operations, these were set up a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. These are pre-scheduled buybacks that were already on the calendar. They were put in place years ago, not by Bessent in the last 6 days. So, while I don't think it's a total coincidence, I also don't think that is the main driver of doing this. So anyway, let's get back to the liquidity and the cash. The stated reasons.
I think that was just an automatic rebill that happened there. If Mr. Butt Poops in the chat, you better show yourself, sir. The people have been wondering where you're at, but it doesn't look like he's showing up. Hopefully, Mr. Butt Poop is doing well.
When they first started it, was essentially to make the market plumbing work better, work smoother, have a higher viscosity. However you want to describe that, it's basically infrastructure management or liquidity structure management. The rationale has not changed since Yellen first started it. And, nothing that Scott has said since taking office has dramatically changed it from what Yellen did. And essentially what he said this week is he wanted greater liquidity support where there's consistent, strong sponsorship from participants. And across all of these comments, the level of the yields, it was not particularly mentioned. Now, a lot of people inferred that. And again, I'm not saying it's not part of it. It's just not necessarily the main thing, and we're going to get into why. The other thing is, to a certain extent, this is not that big a deal.
This is a really useful graphic right here. Let me do a little zoomy zoom. So check this out. This is the move that was made. So across the entire yield curve here, these are the buyback programs that were already in place, up to a max of $4 billion. It was just the 10 to 30 range that was down at $2 billion. So imagine the pink not being here. One thing I appreciate about Brent Johnson is he is an appreciator of the pink, although he does the sort of like pale pastel pink, which, to each his own. But the pink here is what the long end gained from this change in policy that he announced. This was the whole big thing that everyone melted down, and this is QE, and Bessent is just Janet Yellen all over again, and the U.S. dollar is steamlining toward collapse. This was the policy that he announced, that they were going to raise this limit per operation from $2 billion to $4 billion to match up with the rest of the the rest of the yield curve.
From an absolute value standpoint. In other words, the belly of the curve was already doing this, and the long end of the curve had a smaller allocation to this program. So essentially what they did is they just increased the allocation at the long end of the curve so that it now matched the rest of the curve. So to a certain extent, you could say the long end was catching up to the belly of the curve. And so again, every bucket from 1 month out to 10 years already carried this $4 billion cap. At the time, the long term, the 20 years and higher were capped at $2 billion. So that difference, that gap, that has now been eliminated. The ceiling was raised. It's not a new tool and it's not a new program. And let's see, what else do I want to say on this side? And there's 32 total trillion of debt outstanding. So when you look at 2 billion increase or 14 billion total, and you compare it to 32 trillion debt outstanding, this is almost immaterial. However,
so 32 trillion here. So you hear the 40 trillion number. That 40 trillion includes approximately 8 trillion of non-marketable treasury debt, because it's basically different government programs, different federal government programs that owe these things to each other. So it's non-marketable. It can't be traded on the secondary market, can't be bought and sold. That leaves the remaining 32 trillion. So this is just an increase of $2 billion on each long end operation. So $2 billion up against 32 trillion is a total drop in the bucket. But it was the signal that it sent.
However, the U.S. Treasury getting involved in markets is not immaterial, but it's more about the signal than it is about the dollar amount. Now, could this end up being much bigger, and could it be a material amount? Absolutely. I'm just pointing out that right now, this is rather small potatoes. It's more about the signal than it is about the money at this point, or the value of the money at this point. So this is what I was talking about, how the long end catching up. Again, the belly of the curve from 1 month out to 10 years, already capped under Yellen at $4 billion per operation. That was already set up. And on the long end, 10 years and higher, mainly the 20 years and 30 years, that was capped at $2 billion. So really what they've done is they've just turned this pink shaded area here to match the rest of the gray shaded area on the left. So, okay, so why did he do this? Why did he do this now? Well, number one, the long end broke its range. It closed at 5.31. I think it was on last Friday. I think it was last Friday, which was the highest in almost 20 years, right? And 2 sessions later, Bessent comes out and announces this. And the day...
By the way, what this means, just for what it's worth, it means that the 30-year close on August 17, 2026 was a rate at which you could be paid the most by the federal government to hold their debt, this particular type of debt, since 2007.
The day he announced it,
the flip side of that is that means that's more expensive debt that the government has to service. But from the perspective of someone who might want to make money off the federal government, that's what it means.
The 20-year printed at 5.3, and like we said, it immediately went down to like 5.2. And so, I'm sorry, closed at 5.31 on August 17th, not the day he announced it. And it immediately dropped about, around 10 points. And on that same day, on the 17th, last Friday, I guess, a week ago, the 10-year closed at 4.7, which is up about 60 basis points. So again, not immaterial from the start of the year. But I think we're going to get into additional reasons why they could be doing this, but I don't think the main reason they're doing it is the inability of the government to finance itself. I think it has just as much to do with the ability of a lot of other entities to be able to finance itself. Because if long-term U.S. rates go higher, that has implication for not just U.S. banks, financial institutions, mortgage lenders, households, corporations. It has enormous impact on the rest of the world. And they know this, and they are trying to get all of the tools in place for if and when, or in order to manage things so they don't get to a crisis. In other words, it's like rather than driving 100 miles an hour into the corner and slamming the steering wheel to the right to turn before you hit it, they're trying to slow down and do it a little bit at a time rather than...
This is part of why I wanted to play that other video before this, kind of laying the groundwork of what the background is of how the rest of the world and all the other different American institutions as well, what relationship they have to the what'd you call it, like the curator, the manager of the U.S. dollar system.
Rather than trying to wait until they're in a crisis to manage things. But another part of the reason, and again, why I say it's not just the government funding its own costs, the long-term rates have enormous impact, again, not just on the U.S. Treasury itself, but on banks in the United States. It also has this same problem on central bank balance sheets around the world and financial institutions outside the United States because they all hold U.S. Treasuries. So I'm going to talk about the impact on U.S. banks here. But again, this is not a uniquely American issue. But as of right now, we talked about how if yields come down that means prices go higher. That's how fixed income works. Yields go down, prices go higher. And we have already talked about banks use their assets, or I'm sorry, the capital that they have to loan new money into existence. So the capital that they have, the higher it's valued, the bigger the collateral is, the more they can loan and do the business of which they are in.
So if banks bought U.S. Treasuries in the past, and part of their business is they hold these U.S. Treasuries that earn a yield that make them money, and then they lend out money to consumers or to commercial operations, industry, whatever, vehicles. They lend that money out, and the money they make is the difference between the interest rates. They capitalize on that arbitrage. So they hold these treasuries on their, you could think of these as just being assets that they hold on their balance sheets, and those assets have a value. Many of those assets were assets that they purchased in 2020, 2021, 2022, when rates were much lower. Rates have since climbed, which means those assets are worth less. Because if I'm going to go buy something in the secondary market that has a 1% or 2% coupon, why would I do that when I could just go buy something directly from the Treasury for 4.7 or 5%, 5.5 or whatever? So those assets they're holding on their balance sheet that they lend against have degraded in value. Which means then what he's going to describe here is what this actually means then is the higher that rates go for those banks. Because remember, the important thing is that they need to be able to lend money. If they can't lend money anymore, they break. So they need to have that liquidity available to offer out into the market.
And so as long-term rates go higher, that decreases the value of the bonds that are already on their balance sheet. And because the United States was issuing a lot of debt, well, every year, but 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when rates were zero, and now rates are 4 or 5%, the losses, the unrealized losses that the banks are sitting on with regard to these bonds that they bought when rates are lower is very big, right? And they're sitting on about, the estimates vary, and I'll get into why I'm using this 325 here in a second. But the 325 billion of unrealized security losses. The reason they're unrealized is because banks don't have to recognize this on a quarterly basis if they're still holding them. They can classify them as long-term holds and then carry them at par rather than at current market value. But
so what this means is when they're marking these, they're talking about the paper value of the thing on the balance sheet when they're settling up their books. If you were to unlock them and look inside them, you'd go, oh, this thing that was worth $100 is actually only worth $75 now. But if you don't unlock it, if you don't open it up and look inside it, then it's only worth $100. You don't know that it's actually only worth $75. So as far as their books are concerned, they have a $100 asset on the books. But if they get into a situation where they need to sell that asset, like for example, to raise capital, to acquire cash, then that $75 asset has to be marked to market. So it goes from being worth $100 on their books to actually it's only worth $75. And they have a huge loss that they've incurred because the rates climbed since they bought it. And in the first quarter of 2026, there's estimated $325.1 billion of unrealized securities losses currently on the balance sheets of U.S. banks. So this means that a liquidity crisis very quickly turns into a bank collapse crisis.
But that hole is still there. And if depositors started to ask for money back, then you get into a bank run. This is exactly what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic a couple of years ago. So this program of getting yields lower helps to stop this loss, and it makes it easier for the banks. And listen, banking systems are essential for an economy to run. So this is as much about managing the bank balance sheets as it is managing the Treasury balance sheet. And
this is like anybody who would say that there's some sort of like malfeasance or whatever. Like, no, like the U.S. Treasury's responsibility is to protect American banking institutions.
Argue it's probably even more about this than it is about the Treasury balance sheet. Because if capital cannot move, you then get low velocity of money. And without any velocity of money, then you get into deflation. And when you get into deflation, then you get a credit contraction. And when you get a credit contraction, you get a credit collapse. They don't want that. So that's part of this, right? And so this is, in their held to maturity portfolio, there's over $200 billion. And in their available for sale portfolio, there's 100 billion. But you get up to $300 billion, right? And the reason is because there's about $1 trillion worth of these bonds on the banks. And this is, by the way, this is just at the top 3 banks. It's bigger.
Of that, it says here, the $214.5 billion of that sits in held to maturity books, where one sale will taint the whole portfolio. So essentially, they cannot sell these bonds. They have these bonds, they're on their balance sheet, but if they sell them, they're going to have to take these massive losses. And so they're going to have to do everything they possibly can to avoid a situation wherein they have to sell them. Unless there's some sort of an alternative solution that's brought to the table, which is something he's going to get to here in just a little bit.
Bigger than this overall. I'm just highlighting the 3 biggest banks. JP Morgan Bank.
Please tip your streamer, folks. Tips.kingpill.com, or you can gift a sub, or you can go to Cash App or Venmo and send it to @KingPilled. Please do support the stream. We're just under halfway to the goal, but we've still got a ways to go tonight. So please do. No freeloading. Please line up at the Pay Piggy trough. And actually, I guess I'm the one who sits at the Pay Piggy trough, right? Because I'm the one that needs to eat. And you guys are the ones that are providing the slop in the trough for me. And it's kind of confusing. There's something weird going on here.
Bank of America and Wells Fargo, essentially. And so if they have $1 trillion worth of these bonds, but now rates have gone from 1% to 5%, that means the face market value of these bonds has gone down approximately 33%. And so that's where this loss comes from, or the unrealized loss. And while they're sitting on this unrealized loss, it makes them less hesitant to use their balance sheet for further loans or further operations, et cetera, et cetera. So the last thing you want is capital that is stuck and cannot move. So again, we talked at the beginning about how the rally really only lasted 1 session. And so while,
So if you ever hear, for example, Tom Luongo talking about foreign banks attacking the long end of the United States yield curve, then you'll understand then what that means here. If you see what having the long end of the yield curve get attacked, the downstream effect of that on American banks is it's driving American banks into a crisis. And thus you get the emergence of perhaps an existential civilizational split between the offshore banks and the onshore banks.
He's trying to solve this problem, and it solved it for about a day. Now it's back up to where it was right when he started. So the bottom line is he's probably going to have to do more of this. The question is how he does it, and we're going to get into that or the different programs available to him. But again, the signal is that they're putting a cap at the.
How's that again, Brent?
The signal is that they're putting a cap. Again, the signal is that they're putting a cap. Again, the signal. But again, the signal is that they're putting a cap at this level. Now, some people will call that yield curve control. Some people will call it interest rate caps. Again, that's not exactly what this is. I understand the implications, or I understand why that's what it's being described as. I think it's a difference, and I think it's an important difference, but it doesn't. Again, I'm not saying this isn't nothing. I'm just saying it's not necessarily what many people are calling it. Okay, so the other thing is that, when Bessent started talking about it, he started saying things. He's basically saying what he thinks is going on without saying exactly what he thinks is going on. He essentially said that August is a very kind of quiet month. It's a thin month. He thought markets were starting to get distorted by a few different factors, one of them being corporate issuance. And he said that the Treasury, meaning him, when he sees these distortions, he is going to react rather than wait it out, right? And he used, we're going to get to this later too, he used the word asymmetric information. He said he knows things that you don't.
Emperor Trades.
My wife got rocket money. She's asking too many questions about Patriot payments. Sorry for the free loading. Here's some borrowed shekels. Oy vey! Oy vey!
Oh, thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
A shekel for a good guy.
He used, and we're going to get to this later too, he used the word asymmetric information. He said he knows things that you don't. And you know what? On the one hand, it could just be total bullshit, right? I'm not going to deny that. That's what a bluff is. And when you're the big stack at the table, you have the ability to bluff better than many other people.
And there's a whole lot of people who have a whole lot of time and blood and sweat invested in seething at the fact that the United States government is the big stack at the table.
But he is also the Treasury Secretary. He probably does have information that you don't have. And so again, he
imagine being like, no, he doesn't. He's lying. I know everything that Scott Bessent knows.
May see some things that you don't or that we don't. And again, rather than waiting to hit the corner in the turn, he's starting to adjust ahead of time because he can see the corner coming up. So I think that's part of what's going on. And he said, he also said they were going to focus and increase attention on the fiscal consolidation, going forward. So this is not a one-time event, and this is not something where they're just going to react. They are going to do more. What exactly they're going to do, we don't know yet. But this is the asymmetric information I'm talking about. And he said many people are looking at this signal, and they're misinterpreting what it's saying. He would not say exactly what it was, and he sort of tied it to the Iran conflict and misunderstanding the Iraq conflict. And so basically, he's given a signal without a disclosure of what it is he is seeing. And so what the market is seeing, there's deficits.
It is interesting that if you want Scott Bessent's take, it's that the standard narrative about this does not reflect the actual reality. He's not going to give you any more than that for right now, but he says he knows stuff that everyone else doesn't. And what was the other thing back here? The yields do not reflect the underlying fundamentals, and the liquidity, especially at the 30-year point, is very poor. And I saw some people who were spurging out about this, where they're like the yields definitionally are expressing the underlying fundamentals. But I think what this would indicate is that there are nefarious actors, and he's not going to call out those nefarious actors. But he's saying this is not this pricing is not the product of normal market activity. This is the product of interference in the market.
Without a disclosure of what it is he is seeing. And so what the market is seeing, there's deficits with no plan. There's record long-end supply that nobody wants. Inflation is currently above target. There's a buyer's strike. There's a rejection of treasuries. That's what the mass media is saying. What Bessent is saying, he's saying he sees a thin August, which is overly signifying something that really isn't there. A part of it is due to corporate issuance. He also says a fiscal plan is coming that will help change this, and that the Iran conflict is easy. Now, you can choose to believe.
By heavy corporate issuance, I'm assuming, if someone in the chat understands better, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming what that means is that there's a lot of corporates who are issuing into the fixed income markets as well, and so they're like, there's people who are willing to invest in those, so they're drawing down a little bit on the treasury side.
Believe whoever you want to believe, and I would say that there's probably truth and lies on each side, but I'm just laying out what is the current story. It also has shades of Operation Twist, which took place back under Bernanke, where they're basically changing the composition of the outstanding debt, and they're taking it from long-term to short-term, right? So that's kind of what is going on here. So again, QE, yield curve control, a bailout, I think these are all wrong. Again, not to say that this isn't nothing, or that this is nothing, not to say that this isn't important, but it's just not the same operation as those two things. Quantitative easing creates new bank reserves. This does not do that. Yield curve control names a specific level and defends it without limit. That's not what this is. This is a debt management, and it does matter, but it's not QE, and it's not yield curve control, right? Again, this is not a unique thing to the U.S. Treasury. So what else could he do? He has said on a number of occasions that there are many tools that they can use. Now, I will tell you, I've been in this business since 1999, and I didn't know what the hell I even knew or didn't know for the first 4 or 5 years. But what I do know is that from 2020 on, once the dot-com bubble started to break, I have heard every year since then, 26 years now, that the Fed is...
Emperor Atreides stepping up. Thank you for the gifted sub. Forever bulk. So true. Forever bulk. That is, I'm in my bulking era.
Out of bullets. There's nothing else that they can do. That the Treasury is out of bullets. That there's nothing else that they can do. There's a lot of things they can do. Whenever somebody says that, just stop listening to them because they're wrong. And they've been wrong forever.
Yes.
Now, does that mean that Bessent can just do whatever he wants and without consequence? No, absolutely not. But to say they can do nothing is just to be completely naive, quite honestly. I don't know how else to say it. So anyway.
Imagine betting against the U.S. Treasury.
He has said on several occasions that he has a big dual kit. Doubling this buyback on the long end of the curve so that it matches the belly of the curve was the smallest thing that he could do without totally changing everything. And so that's what he did. But there's many other things. You could say it was mainly just a jawbone as much as anything, right? Because the money part of it was so small. This is mainly a jawbone. The other thing is that they could raise the caps. They could take it from 14 or 4 billion, up to 6, up to 10, up to 20. They could still do that, right? They could cut the long sales and they could fund with shorter bills. They could set up some new program with the Fed that buys back debt, and that maybe they could go back to QE. They could go to yield curve control. I'm just saying they haven't done these things yet. And
so, which is funny, like everyone's melting down about this and saying that it's QE or that it's yield curve control, and it's like, nope, they still have those tools that they can use as well. There's obviously costs to using those tools, so they're not going to them. But if you say they don't have any bullets left, they have those. They haven't used those.
There are other things they could do which are not disclosed. It could be some new program of his own design or some plan that he and Warsh have together. I'm just saying there's lots of things that they can do. And this is where we're going to get to the sovereign debt optimization facility. Okay, so what is the sovereign?
Now this is the part that got me got the old noggin jogging yesterday.
Debt optimization facility. Well, you know what? This is the brainchild of my friend Mike Green. And for those of you who don't know who Mike Green is, you should know who Mike Green is. Mike Green is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And he is very good at this type of stuff. And it's his solution for something that the Treasury, in conjunction with the Fed, could use to manage this process, specifically about the capital that is turning into concrete on bank balance sheets because of the unrealized losses.
And for those who don't know who Mike Green is, he was the portfolio manager for Peter Thiel's private hedge fund. So managing Peter Thiel's private money.
And Mike is the world's foremost expert on the impact of passive management on market structure. And for those who are not familiar with that concept, I don't have time to get into it today, but suffice it to say that machines and passive management and the simplest algorithm in the world, which says if there's cash buy and if there's cash requested sell, is now the driver of markets. And it is not just on equities. It is also increasingly apparent in fixed income, and not just fixed income, but sovereign fixed income. And Mike has been hammering this point for a long time. And you know what? I'm going to say something.
Basically, just the simple thing is it's like imagine algos that are just trading. You have like automatic trading that is triggered at specific marks, and it's not being managed because a lot of this trading is happening really, really fast. So it's not being directly managed by a person that's saying, oh, that's a good trade, make that trade. These are trades that are running automatically. So it's passive. And when you start, there's the possibility that you get a runaway spiral where something starts to crash. And so they start selling that thing that's crashing and something else starts to rise. So they buy the thing that's rising because, money go down bad, money go up good. And so once the crash and the spike start to happen, it becomes self-reinforcing and it happens at an accelerating exponential rate. And so this can become a liquidation loop where you just get completely liquidated because it happens so quickly.
Say something about Mike. I probably shouldn't say, but I'm going to say it anyway because Mike's a friend of mine. I think Mike, sometimes people will hear Mike talk and they will not listen to what he's saying because they oftentimes do not like the way he is saying it. And I personally think that Mike is one of the...
Nevsky, he did it again! The sniper is back! The giver is given unto. Congratulations, Emperor Atreides. Nevsky, you're a patriot, man.
The most misunderstood people in the world of finance. And I'm particularly sensitive to that because I think I am, to a certain extent, fairly misunderstood both on a personal level and on a professional level when it comes to the things I talk about. But I can tell you that Mike Green is...
Brent has taken a ton of shit for the dollar milkshake theory.
Doing this, and he is...
All the contrarians hate that there's a contrarian who's more right than them.
Pounding his fist on the table about this because he cares. Now, you might think that he is misaligned, or perhaps that he doesn't think the right way, or perhaps he's misguided, or maybe you think he doesn't know what he's talking about. You can determine that for yourself, but you don't get to say he doesn't care. I can tell you absolutely he is doing this because he cares. And he has made this known. And as a result of Mike, more than anybody else, the U.S. Treasury knows about this. The Federal Reserve knows about this. The Bank of International Settlements knows about this. The SEC knows about this. The NFA knows about this. And they all owe a debt of thanks to Mike Green. Now, with that said, let me explain to you this idea of his. His idea is to set up...
Now, this will get a little technical, so you may need to rewind and listen to it a couple of times. But I'm a proud a proud retard maxer, and I was able to basically grasp at least the essence of it the first time through, and then the second time I listened through it, I got the mechanics down better.
A sovereign debt optimization facility. And what it does is this would be a new program, and it would be a swap where the bank would swap these legacy low coupon bonds for a new bond at par at the same market value built on top of the program that already exists. This would address the drunk at the auction. What do I mean by that? So going back to the passive management issue, because of passive influence and many market cap weighted indices, this means that the higher something trades in price, the more it is required to be bought. It also means that when something starts to get sold, it has to get sold. It doesn't matter whether market fundamentals matter or not. It doesn't matter what the extenuating circumstances are. What it does is it exacerbate markets' moves to both the upside and it exacerbates moves to the downside. And it becomes automatic. And once it gets going, it is very hard to stop. And so Mike's point.
That's the liquidation loop dynamic that he's describing.
Right. And the drunk at the auction, the example is when you go to some charity auction and some drunk guy shows up with his girlfriend on his arm, some rich drunk guy shows up and he starts bidding on stupid things at stupid, ridiculously high prices. Now, what everybody should do is just step aside, let him buy everything and move away. But that itself causes problems. But that's not what happens. What happens is they see him bidding up prices. And because they have to get up and dance or their jobs will get lost, they start bidding up prices. And they just follow the drunk guy at the auction.
And
while that works a certain way on the upside, it works the exact same way on the downside. And that brings systemic risk onto the table. And it makes it a higher probability than a lower probability. And so Mike's point is we need to have something like this set up to address the drunk guy at the auction before he shows up. Because if we try to set it up when he is just getting there and starting to cause havoc, it is going to be too late, right? So he has kind of come up with how do we address the $1 trillion of these low interest yielding bonds on the top 3 biggest bank balance sheets and the unrecognized $200 to $300 billion of losses that accompany them. Now, this is how it would work. The swap happens. The bank initially had $100 million. And so if you look at this before SDOF and after SDOF, before, I'm just going to read through it. The bank would have, let's say they had $100 million of exposure. The current face value is around $65 million. So because they haven't marked it down, it's still $100 million of collateral. Now, the annual coupon, because it was a...
So that's, again, saying that $100 million, the face value on it, while it's on the balance sheet, is $100 million. However, they can't sell it because if they sell it, they're going to have to market to market and realize that loss. So as long as it's unsold and just sitting on their balance sheet, then they're okay. But if there's some sort of a liquidity event and they need to sell it, then you're going to trigger one of these drunk man at the auction events.
It was a low yielding bond is paying them $1.75 million. And so
so it might be a bond that they got at when rates were at 1.75. So that's the coupon that it's paying is 1.75.
Annual net income is $1.75 million. After this swap, they would no longer have the legacy bond. They would no longer have the legacy fair value. They would have a new treasury with a $65 million face value. And they would have a deferred loss carry forward on their balance sheet as well of $35 million. And so it would match the $100 million of regulatory capital they had before doing this swap. Now, this is not currently allowed under safe harbor. So this would require involvement from the SEC and the regulators to make this new or valid under safe harbor.
So basically, they're taking this old bond, say at 1.75, they swap that for a new bond at 3.38, and they take that loss. They realize that loss now. However, they don't. It becomes a deferred loss. So, and this is like it's a paperwork. What would you call it? Like a little bit of paperwork magic, but it enables them to actually unlock that concrete that is just weighing down their balance sheet. It enables them to lend more, and it actually leaves them ultimately in a position they can defer that loss out across multiple years, and the net coupon that they're receiving is more than they were receiving before.
If this was done, the annual income jumps from 1.75 million to 3.38 million. The amortization drag from the $35 million loss carry forward is 1.7 million. So you subtract that off of the 3.38 and you're left with 2.21. So after it's done, you have a bank that has the same amount of regulatory capital, it's earning a higher spread, and now that capital it can now be put to work. It is no longer concrete, and it can be used to increase the velocity of money.
So this says here is carrying value never moves. So the value being carrying forward on the balance sheet never moves. So, so no capital actually gets destroyed, and net income rises $460,000 per $100 million tendered. It's a pretty brilliant notion, or a pretty brilliant little suggestion that he's made here, and I don't know. I find these sorts of things fascinating. And this is why I'm fundamentally so optimistic about anything, because you can never, you should never underestimate the ingenuity of people. Now, who knows if this actually gets deployed? It's not guaranteed. But Mike Green is someone that people will listen to, and Brent Johnson already said that all these different agencies are already aware of this. And I think he even said Scott Bessent is aware, like he knows for a fact that Scott Bessent is aware of this particular problem that Mike Green is developing a custom solution for.
And it can be used to help offset and deal with the drunk when he shows up at the auction. So again, Mike himself has said a couple things have to be true first. But I should say, before I forget, I think this problem that we're talking about, the problem with the drunk showing up at the auction and exacerbating these moves in the treasury market, doesn't just affect the treasury market. It affects corporate balance sheets. It affects the mortgage situation, or the mortgage market. It affects international corporates. It affects international central banks. It affects the entire system. And I think that, as much as anything, is why Scott Bessent is getting involved now. Now, is he planning to do this idea of Mike's? I don't know, maybe. But I think he knows about this, or actually I know he knows about this problem, and he is going to use his tools as the Treasury Secretary and as a macro manager of several decades to get ahead of it rather than react to it. So again, going back to Mike's, though, he puts two of his own conditions on it. And by the way, I am going to put the link to Mike's report that he has written on this. You should absolutely follow Mike on Substack. Mike Green, it's titled, Yes, I Give a Fig. This particular report was called What the U.S. Treasury Needs. I will put the link in the description of this video. You should absolutely follow Mike. You should absolutely read that report. So in any case, getting back to what he's saying, it's an emergency instrument and not a standing one. This is not something that just sits there all the time like swap lines. And there's a couple things that have to be done ahead of time before the crisis arrives, namely the safe harbor condition, right? And he is saying you don't necessarily do it right now. You just have the facility ready, and then you only do it when it is absolutely needed to do it. So first of all, you have to have the facility in place. You have to only use it when it's necessary, and then you have to have this accounting standards adjusted ahead of time. Part of the reason he is saying it needs to happen now rather than later when it's really needed is because of the nature of the market now, with the influence of passive and the structure of the market being dramatically altered over the last 20 years, and the speed with which this stuff can happen.
I'll add to this real quick while I'm thinking about it, that he, this reality, the fact that there's all of this bad debt currently on, all the balance sheets, especially American balance sheets, is part of the reason why there is such an attack on American financial markets. Are you with me? I want to make sure that it's still up. Okay, there it is. It's back. Did it drop out on Kick? Okay, it was good on Kick. All right. So if you think of this as being like concrete that's on these bank balance sheets, then the weaponized attacks against the American financial system are assuming that there's this hard floor there that they can crush the American financial system against. But if there's an outlet here and that hard floor disappears, then suddenly the American financial system, it get like an escape hatch, and it can maintain liquidity and viscosity and agility. It can stay dynamic instead of getting frozen and collapsing.
Is the activation has to be able to be done in hours rather than days. Because once the liquidation loop begins, it accelerates, and there will not be time to put this in place after it already starts to happen. So again, what they're basically doing, they're trying to bring down long-term fixed rates. They're refinancing it with shorter-term paper. They're doing this because they think this is a weird time of year. They think there's going to be some changes made in the coming months that's going to allow them to more effectively manage long-term rates than it is today. And they didn't want to wait until they had to move. And so they started to do it while they had the option to move.
And that's another interesting point, is that there is something coming down the pike. Scott Bessent's hinting at something that's coming that is going to substantially change the fiscal situation in some sense. I'm sure that stable coins are a part of this, but who knows what else it could be.
Now, the other thing I'll say is part of the reason they're doing this is, one of the risks of doing this is that the yield curve is becoming more and more concentrated on the short end of the curve, right? So there's almost $40 trillion of debt outstanding. I think it even might have hit 40 trillion this week. 7 trillion or 8 trillion of it's intragovernmental, so that cannot be bought back in this program, or it's not eligible for this program. So that leaves 32 trillion. 16 trillion of that 32 is in the maturity of 2 to 10 years. 7 trillion is in T-bills. Another 6 trillion is in bonds, 20 or 30 years. And then there's residual amounts of some tips and federal.
So that's a good breakdown here. So of the 32 trillion that's there, so the terminology here that I've had to learn and I try to remember is that notes refers to the 2 to 10 year range. Bills refers to the 4 to 52 weeks range, so less than a year and more than 4 weeks, so more than a month, less than a year. And then bonds is the term for the 20 and 30 years. So if you hear people talk about bills, then they're typically bills just shorthand for the less than a year. Why that matters is because think about what happens at the end of the term. If the government borrows $1,000 from me and says in 52 weeks I'm going to give you $1,000 back, then you have to refinance that debt. You have to cycle that debt through more frequently on the shorter term debt.
Federal Reserve notes, et cetera, et cetera. But 33% of the outstanding debt right now needs to be refinanced in the next year. That's a big deal, and this is part of the reason why I think stablecoins are important, because stablecoins are an avenue that will allow the Treasury to continue issuing at the short end, perhaps for a longer period of time than they otherwise would have been. Okay, so let's keep going here. Oh, this is just explaining where the debt goes. I'm gonna jump over that for now. So again, I think what this is, I think the line in the sand was that, around 5.3%, Bessent didn't like where it was headed. He didn't think it was based on fundamentals. He thought it was based on a few other things. And he has said he's basically shown that that's where he is going to act. They also want to get a steeper yield curve. The reason they want a steeper yield curve is because that allows banks to be more profitable, and because banks borrow, or the banks pay at the short end and they earn at the long end. So if you have a flat curve, they can't make very much because that spread is narrow. But if you get a steeper curve, they can make more money. And again, banks are one of the most important parts of the entire system, so they need to keep the banks healthy, right? And again, what the buybacks can't do though is they can't do nothing for industrial policy, and they can't allocate capital. So while this is not something to ignore, and it is something to pay very close attention to, it does have its limitations. And so this is by no means a solution to everything. And the last thing I'll say is this is not going to stop. I know many people would say, get out of the markets. Treasury should not be involved in the markets. We need a free market. Again, I'm very...
Real quick before we get to that, I was, as I am wont to do, I was going back and forth, stress testing some different ideas with Grok earlier. And just on the thing with stablecoins, stablecoins function as a large, relatively inelastic non-bank buyer of T-bills. Current market size is about 300 billion. Bessent and market projections put potential scale at 2 to 4 trillion by around 2030. So if you think about that, current size is about 300 billion. I've been hearing that 300 billion number for a while, so I think it probably is a little bigger than that. But you're talking about it increasing by by about an order of magnitude over the next three or so years. Which could generate several hundred billion to around $1 trillion of incremental bill demand. That's already material and growing. That demand lets Treasury increase the share of bills in its issuance mix without the short rates spiking as sharply as they would if only banks, money market funds, and traditional cash managers were absorbing the supply. The introduction of stablecoins and the function that stablecoins will provide will allow the Treasury to actually, I suspect that it's going to fundamentally change the nature of the optimal yield curve. And my suspicion is that it's going to actually make a flatter yield curve more tolerable. It can't go fully flat because, as he's describing here, like that difference, that arbitrage is the bread and butter of the bank. So a flatter yield curve makes business harder for them. But it's just kind of an intuition that there's something about the introduction of stablecoins that is going to permanently, fundamentally alter the structure of Treasury debt issuance and rate management. And so, you know, like right now they're changing the U.S. government with this, or Scott Bessent with the this twist function he's talking about, where he's retiring more long-term debt and issuing more short-term debt. So the overall maturity profile is getting younger, getting shorter for the Treasury. And for trades again.
Deflation doesn't seem like such a big deal if you can denominate USD into tiny tokenized fractions in USDC, Tether, Circle, etc. Check out Stellar, X402, and MPP. AI agents need currency to transact in.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the other really interesting thing is as AI agents start scaling up and then taking on more and more. Like we're going to reach a point where the vast majority of financial transactions, we probably are already there in terms of like algorithmic trading, but we're going to reach a point where the vast majority of financial transactions are not going to be done by a person, be like between a person and a person. There's going to be agents that are engaged in all of these, even if it's like just microtransactions. So yeah, that demand lets Treasury increase the share of bills in its issuance mix without the short rate spiking as sharply as they would if only banks, money market funds, and traditional cash managers were absorbing the supply. Bessent has explicitly tied this to his Treasury twist, more bills plus long-end buybacks. The result is greater flexibility to keep long-end supply lighter and to lean against rises in long rates, even if the curve itself is flatter than historical norms. It goes on and talks about where the idea starts to break down in having that. It reduces the net interest margin for banks, so which ultimately raises their marginal funding costs. And so there would have to be other changes around it for that idea to be sustainable. The idea that you could maintain a flatter yield curve, and be able to benefit from the flexibility and the massive demand for the short end issuance through stablecoins.
I'm very sympathetic to your arguments. I understand where you're coming from. That's not going to happen. So if you want to make money, pay attention to what's going to happen as opposed to what you would like to see happen. In the last 18 months, Bessent on 4 different occasions has gotten very involved in very important markets. He did it in Argentina to help an ally. He did it in Iran to hurt an enemy. He did it in Japan to help an ally. And now he's doing it in the United States Treasury market itself, which affects everybody. So, and I think this is the new normal. And yes. I think there's a reason why there's a new normal. We have talked about this in our report, The Band, that we put out a month or so ago. If you have not read The Band, I would encourage you to go to santiagocapital.com, our research section, and find the report, The Band. In that section, in that report, we had a couple different chapters that I'm going to highlight. One of them was Painted Black. And that was the idea that because of the way the United States is dealing with the rest of the world now, as opposed to a rules-based order on an America First strategy, they are going to start doing things in a more aggressive way, in a more proactive way than they have in recent memory. And while
so you're not going to get nearly as much passive, kumbaya, we're just all equals here sort of behavior from the Treasury, which is going to be the case for the entire U.S. financial system then. It's going to be a lot more aggressive and proactive. And this is going to be a characteristic of the emergent American empire.
And while that doesn't mean that the U.S. government, whether it's the Fed, the Treasury, the military, the State Department, it doesn't mean that they can just do whatever they want. It doesn't mean that there won't be ramifications. It doesn't mean that the United States won't get hurt. All of those things will happen. There will be ramifications. The U.S. will get hurt. Things will go sideways. It won't all go to plan. But that doesn't mean it's going to stop either. And this is the new normal, I believe. And I think Bessent acting in the markets is part of that. Now, this will eventually end very, very badly. I have said that from the very beginning. But I think it takes a lot longer to get there. That in-game scenario that everybody thinks happens when the Fed totally loses control, when the Treasury totally loses control, when the U.S. government totally loses control, and it all comes crashing down. That's the sympathy for the devil chapter. And while we think we will eventually get there, we don't think we're there yet. And this is what we think all the American fatalists and the U.S. dollar fatalists and the U.S. system fatalists get wrong over and over. It's not that their conclusions are wrong, it's that their timing is wrong. And so I would encourage you to think about that long and hard.
And I think their timing is wrong because they just fundamentally don't understand. This is the thing we were talking about in the Discord. It's not that they're wrong per se. It's that they are incapable of being right because they don't actually understand the system that they're analyzing. So let's keep this going here. Now, let's talk about Iran for just a little bit. And please do tip your streamer, folks. Official data from a non-U.S. source. Ship volume through the Strait of Hormuz the Strait of America, is increasing significantly, and it seems there's nothing Iran can do about it. The regime in Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz is eroding. This is from Jason Brodsky, policy director at United Against Nuclear Iran. The regime in Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz is eroding. Nearly 200 ships navigated the Strait of Hormuz last week, up from 150 the previous week, and just 40 2 weeks earlier, according to data from the UK Maritime Trade Operations Center. It's an interesting source. And from tankertrackers.com, it says a busy day in the Gulf of Oman, where there are at least 15 sets of STS stands for ship-to-ship transfer sessions taking place. So the ships pull up alongside each other and they transfer their products across. We count 25 million barrels of crude oil plus some refined products. The oil originates from almost every country in the region, minus Iran. The notion that Iran has any sort of say-so over the operation of the Strait of Hormuz is very, like, all of the mainstream world is now accepting that this is the reality. Scott Bessent said President Trump has dismantled Iran's military capabilities, destroyed nearly 100% of its military factories, and buried its nuclear program. We are now entering the endgame. At dawn begins an economic D-Day, the greatest single financial offensive ever marshaled against an adversary. The Islamic Republic has subsisted by dressing extortion as security guarantees. It has drawn strength from a calculus that regards Iranian retaliation as certain and American enforcement as negotiable. Under President Trump, that era is over, and those who fear the danger of defying Tehran ought not to discount the cost of testing Washington. The president has created the conditions to leverage every agency, every authority, and action many assumed we would never summon. Our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains the tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. Now, the rhetoric here is talking about things like extortion and terrorism and the nuclear weapon and all of that. That's the framing that's being used here to justify what they're doing. However, as I read this article written by Scott Bessent and then play this announcement from him the other day, I think it should be clear that all of the background in the previous 2 hours and 45 minutes of this stream, this is much more about pursuing the financial networks and using Iran as a pretext for going after the illicit financial networks that also happen to be the people manipulating American bond markets. Now, notably, Bessent wrote this article in the Financial Times. Remember what I said about when the Treasury does something? They do lots and lots of things. So if everybody starts freaking out about a thing that they're doing, especially when it seems to be a relatively insignificant thing, that's probably, there's some signal in the fact that people are freaking out about it. But then if the Treasury Secretary comes out and announces an economic D-Day for Iran and publishes it in the Financial Times, that's a signal. Who reads the Financial Times? Where is the Financial Times published out of? Who is the intended audience? This is a very intentional signal, like literally the definition of giving a signal to a particular audience. What audience is it being delivered to? Countries that calculate appeasement of the regime to be a safer choice should reconsider. Look at that. Look at that. Like, I could just imagine. I can imagine seeing this in black and white, or seeing like a bust created of him. Very historic times that we live in. The writer is the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. In 1943, the Allied powers convened the Tehran Conference to plot the course of an uncharted act. As Roosevelt and Churchill weighed a campaign that would culminate in the Normandy landings, they asked themselves what could be done, quote, to bring the greatest pressure to bear on the enemy. History has returned that question to Tehran, and the moment has arrived to answer it with the full weight of American resolve. President Donald Trump and the overwhelming might of our military have significantly dismantled Iran's military capabilities and weakened its nuclear program. Now we are entering the endgame. At dawn begins an economic D-Day, the single greatest financial offensive ever marshaled against an adversary. For 47 years. How many years? Isn't it interesting, this number? I keep seeing this. It was perfect that it happened this year. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been a malignant force on the world. It's interesting there's a lowercase r on Republic here. Like, it doesn't even get to be dignified as an official institution. At dawn. Yes, Liddy Milk. How did I miss it? It begins at dawn. Within Iran, a corrupt regime has consigned what would be one of the world's strongest economies to ruin, and its enterprising people to repression. Beyond its borders, the Iranian regime maintains a network of proxies that perpetuate its terror. The U.S. has paid an especially grievous price, but we are scarcely alone in facing this scourge. Too often, though, we find ourselves alone in our resolve to thwart it. President Trump has decimated Iran's economy to a point where the rial has never been weaker and inflation has rarely been higher. The regime's final refuge now lies in the self-deception of fearful nations that still believe accommodating aggression can secure a durable peace. Iran's enablers purchase and transport its petroleum. Iran's enablers. Wonder who these enablers are. Well, they're the people who purchase and transport its petroleum. They facilitate the flow of its finances through exchange houses and free trade zones. Who manages exchange houses and free trade zones? They welcome Iran's flights and maintain registries on its behalf. They turn a blind eye to seaborne fuel transfers and the illicit use of their banks, all while concealing the extent of their complicity. In short, these countries calculate appeasement of the regime to be the safer course, but they would do well to consider the consequences of sustaining it. In the 17th century, French philosopher Blaise Pascal, I didn't think that you could make me adore Scott Bessent even more, but the fact that he is appealing to Pascal's wager in announcing economic D-Day on all of Iran's enablers, he is the greatest. The greatest Treasury Secretary since Alexander Hamilton. In the 17th century, French philosopher Blaise Pascal gave enduring expression to the dilemma beneath this temptation. He understood that uncertainty does not absolve men or nations of divine judgment. In fact, it demands a more exacting appraisal of risk and imposes a higher price for error. You don't get to plead ignorance. Pascal's eponymous wager now applies to Iran's lifelines. Nations that, in courting reprieve from Tehran, continue to replenish the very regime from which they seek protection and now exceed the limits of America's tolerance. President Trump is doing what his predecessors refused by ending a threat they resigned themselves to managing. Who's been managing the Iranian threat? For decades, the political class accepted an endless cycle of provocation instead of advancing American interests. The political class. Interesting. So we're talking about Iran's enablers, and it's the political class. Not another generation should be condemned to the menace of fanatics who devote themselves to death to America and fulfilling the regime's nuclear ambitions. And total financial isolation can obviate the need for American force while enlarging the sphere of freedom for our allies. So, total financial isolation instead of military action. Those who sever Iran's remaining financial and commercial connectivity will reinvigorate their own. There's a carrot and a stick. They will deepen their access to global capital, reinforce confidence in their markets, and attain the standing they seek in the world economy. The alternative for those who tether themselves to Tehran is the foreclosure of any path to lasting prosperity. Illicit finance will flourish, as it so often does, where confidence has collapsed. And any nation that serves as a financial artery of a withering regime should expect to share in its isolation. To become a sanctuary for terror is to become, in the eyes of the United States, a global pariah. So we have now created a forcing function to determine who gets in the dollar system and who does not. Iran is a proxy for whom? The Islamic Republic has subsisted by dressing extortion as security guarantees. It has drawn strength from a calculus that regards Iranian retaliation as certain and American enforcement as negotiable. Under President Trump, that era is over. And those who fear the danger of defying Tehran ought not to discount the cost of testing Washington. The president has created the conditions to leverage every agency, every authority and action many assumed we would never summon. Any remaining tie to Tehran will hasten the economic ostracism of countries and entities, whether that tie be purposefully constructed or willfully ignored. You don't get to plead ignorance. We know who you are. You know who you are. And if, as the regime's grasp on power crumbles alongside its economy, Iran resorts to military action against U.S. forces or its Gulf neighbors, make no mistake, President Trump will respond swiftly and decisively. The world should understand that our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains the tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. Pascal considered salvation to be a choice. Stop it!
Just starting to catch up now, but paying my premium prescription fees stop being poor Labians.
So true, so true. Thank you, Duffhead. In honor of you, I give you a...
Trump's a Jew! Gross. Ew. I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care. Let me tell you. We don't care.
Be like Duffhead. We're getting a little closer there. We've passed halfway. All right, last paragraph, one more time. The world should understand that our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains the tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. You might call it the tyrannical regime. Pascal considered salvation to be a choice. As a great wave of American resolve comes ashore, are Iran's enablers willing to wager their future against it? A great wave of American resolve. Patriots, are you constructing your resolve? Are you directing your resolve? Are you sending energy to our president? To our great alpha fag Treasury Secretary? Patriot energy rising. A great wave of American resolve is coming ashore, and nobody's ready for it. Here is Secretary Bessent announcing economic D-Day on Iran and allies.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the sup,
Today,
homos.
Doom Guy! Patriot, 5 more gifted subs. Thank you, sir. Who do we got in here? Retard Maxer, Willing Always, and Go Fuck Yourself Industries. Patriots. Those other 2 names are suspect. But you know what? The money spends all the same.
Good afternoon. Today, at President Trump's direction, the United States Treasury has begun Operation Economic Outcast, an unprecedented campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Operation Economic Outcast. Now watch his demeanor throughout this whole thing. And just tell me if you think if you're a loyal Labian, you have watched a lot of Scott Bessent talking in a lot of different environments. Stop it again!
Also, Matt, it is imperative that the NHH clip be the tritone bass.
Good point. I'll make a note of that. Thank you, Duffhead. Tell me if you think that this is a guy who is in over his head, who doesn't believe in this. He's just desperately trying to remedy a situation that some incompetent, dementia-ridden president created. Tell me if you get that sense from him, the way he talks here.
Operation Economic Outcast, an unprecedented campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran and its enablers. In the Second World War, D-Day marked the historic beginning of a campaign with our allies to target and drive the enemy from its positions, including those in third countries. Today, in that same spirit, we are launching an economic onslaught against Iran's financial connections around the globe. Our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains this tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone.
Around the globe. You'll notice throughout this video, he emphasizes this over and over again. Once we get to the Q&A section after his opening statement here, you'll notice they keep asking him questions about China. and he's not getting into the China thing, he keeps emphasizing this applies to everyone.
Iran's fanatics devote themselves to death to America and seek nuclear weapons to do just that. They have murdered and maimed more of our citizens and service members than any other terrorist regime on earth. And they have been at war against America, their neighbors in the Gulf, and much of the world for 47 years. President Trump has taken action that his predecessors have long deferred. And under his leadership, America is no longer managing the Iranian threat. We are ending it.
Woohoo! We are no longer managing it. We are ending it.
Our great armed forces have laid the groundwork for achieving the president's objective of preventing Iran from ever obtaining nuclear weapons. They have shown America's resolve to finally end this threat. And the strength of America's economy under President Trump allows us to wage this sustained financial operation alongside the might of our military. Iran
I like that the strength of Trump's economy is what allows us to do this.
Allows us to wage this sustained financial operation alongside the might of our military. Iran now faces a very clear choice with only two paths before them: complete global isolation and a subsistence economy, or a path back to normalcy with an opportunity to rejoin the global economy. Today, we are launching Operation Economic Outcast to foreclose every other option available to the Iranian regime.
So there's two options. You capitulate and you get re-entered into the global economy with all the benefits that come from that. Or we break you to the level of a subsistence economy.
Treasury has mapped every node, every facilitator, and every network that Iran has used to smuggle oil and evade sanctions. Beginning today, the actions of Treasury and other agencies will tighten the noose and block every potential source of revenue that funds the IRGC and the evil Iranian regime. We are enforcing a zero leakage approach. There will be no minimal breathing space for the regime to rebuild its capacity to inflict terror against America and the world. The final refuge of this regime is the mistaken conclusion of nations that still finance the Iranian threat in the hopes of evading it. It is no longer acceptable to operate in the gray spaces of this conflict. Countries cannot claim they are blind to enabling this activity. Iran's enablers purchase, transport its petroleum. They facilitate the flow of its finances through exchange houses and free trade zones. They welcome Iran's flights and maintain registries on its behalf. They turn a blind eye to seaborne fuel transfers and overland transits. They condone illicit use of their banks, all the while concealing the extent of their complicity. The president is making phone calls to world leaders with specific requests to cease their interactions with the regime.
I just forgot what I was going to say. Just escaped me. I'm looking at this over here. I saw you guys talking about Joe Kent as a former Bernie bro. Yeah, I haven't dug into this. I just bookmarked it when I saw this. But yeah, there's apparently an old picture of Joe Kent from the past. He's talking about President Trump calling other world leaders. Oh yeah, so like, I haven't seen anybody else making these observations. Everyone's just like, oh yeah, he's like really mad at China. And what's he describing here? All the financial institutions that are facilitating these transactions, or at least turning the blind eye to them, who are very invested in the Strait of Hormuz. Oh, and the thing that it was just there. It was just there. He talks about how they've mapped all of these different things. Remember how I mentioned on the last show about you can you strike something, you poke it, and you see who scatters. So like they start hitting the speedboats coming up across the Gulf of America, in part because when you hit them, then all of the financial networks and all of the communications networks and stuff, they all light up because it's like, normal operations got disrupted. We need to start changing our approach here. And they've spent the last year plus tracking all of the scrambling rats in and around Iran as this whole thing has been happening. He's come out multiple times and said, we're mapping all of the financial networks around there. And when Iran started striking all of their neighbors, all of the other Gulf countries came to the United States and said, here, let us open up our books. Let us show you. Let us reveal to you all the different institutions that are in and around the Gulf who are facilitating this. That's who this message is directed at. This message is not directed at China, or at least not overwhelmingly.
We are already seeing results. Over the weekend, comments from Iranian leadership clearly acknowledged the effect of this campaign, and nations that facilitate any interactions with the regime should quickly heed our message. Those who stand with the United States will reap the rewards of our partnership. Those who tether themselves to the Iranian regime should expect to share in the isolation of a withering regime. Teams from Treasury, State, and the U.S. military are now meeting with their global counterparts to tell them that the United States expects action. Every country has a defined timeline to shut down activities we have identified. If they do not take action, we will do so unilaterally through Treasury authorities. For example,
so you have a timeline. We are contacting you. We've got our strike teams that are going to each of these nations saying, here are the institutions, here are the networks, here are the funding sources, here is all the stuff that we've tracked, here's all the evidence. Here's your list of things. You stop doing all of these things. You have a timeline to stop doing those things. If you do not stop doing those things, we are unilaterally, through the power of the United States Treasury, going to enforce secondary sanctions on you. You are going to be frozen out.
For example, every branch of Bank Millet must be shuttered and dark. And let me be clear, any entity that facilitates money laundering on behalf of Iran will be removed from the US dollar system. The clock just started ticking. And dark. And let me be clear, any entity that facilitates money laundering on behalf of Iran will be removed from the US dollar system. The clock just started ticking.
Will be removed from the US dollar system. Interesting. The Treasury Secretary seems to understand the difference between the US dollar and the US dollar system.
The new sectoral sanctions determinations issued today target 5 of Iran's most vital lifelines that it exploits in other countries: digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping.
Now, I saw some people passing this around that said, I think it might have even been fucking Luke Groman was like, notice that he doesn't mention oil. He already talked about oil, you dumb... These 5 are in addition to oil. So they're not just going after oil revenues, which they've already... Remember, the governor of the Iranian bank said our oil exports have gone to zero? 25% of their GDP has gone to zero? And now then there's these other 5 that are on top of that.
Removed from the US dollar system. The clock just started ticking. The new sectoral sanctions determinations issued today target 5 of Iran's most vital lifelines that it exploits in other countries: digital assets, technology.
Digital assets, interesting. Crypto? It's almost as if crypto seems to play some role in this. Remember, Iran has been invoicing in Tether. This is part of the... So if you go back, you remember there's different factions within Iran. And like part of Iran, the more militant Islamic Republic part of Iran is being set up against the civilian government, essentially. Oversimplified, but good enough. And so part of the intent here you can see is that the United States wants Iran to use Tether. It's actually very much in the United States' interest, because what happens if there's increased demand for Tether? What is Tether backed by? Tether has more U.S. treasuries on their balance sheet, I believe, than Germany. What does that mean? Why is it that Iran has been invoicing, selling oil in Tether? Fascinating. But other cryptocurrencies.
Technology, gold, aviation, and shipping. These measures broaden secondary sanctions risk for anyone foolish enough to continue conducting business with this regime, and will accelerate the speed with which we pursue them. As I speak, Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control is also sanctioning over 60 entities, individuals, and vessels around the world that enable the Iranian regime to procure illicit nuclear and missile technology, conduct cyber operations, and generate oil revenue.
You definitely don't want OFAC coming after you.
This is a sustained campaign to collapse every last option for Iran. Let there be no ambiguity as to the position of the United States. And
no ambiguity indeed.
Economic engagement of any kind with this murderous regime will expose those responsible to the full reach of American power. For decades, this regime has drawn strength from a calculus that regards Iranian retaliation as certain and American enforcement as negotiable. Under President Trump, that era is over. To the ordinary soldiers supporting this regime, as more and more of your paychecks stop or are supposedly just delayed, ask whether your commanders are leading your country to triumph or to ruin. And recall that the Berlin Wall fell when ordinary soldiers decided not to shoot at their own people.
This is one big threat vector for the Iranian regime, is that eventually they're no longer able, like they've got gas shortages, everything's getting more expensive, massive inflation among the people. But then once the soldiers themselves can no longer get paid because the regime literally cannot generate the revenue necessary to pay them, it's curtains.
And to those who enable Tehran, do not discount the cost of testing Washington's resolve. No nation should expect to enjoy the rewards of our system while helping those who seek to destroy it.
That's the new American imperial credo. Where the dollar system is concerned, no one is going to enjoy the benefits of the American system if you're allied with the people trying to destroy it. There is the American system, which is the global financial system. The rest of the world built the global financial system off the backs of Americans, and now Americans said, we elected Donald Trump to take back control of that system. We control the global financial system. The global financial system is American property. And America gets to decide who is allowed and who's not. Them's the breaks.
It is now a time for world leaders to make a decision between prosperity and isolation, peace and terror, America and Iran. The campaign we begin today will gather force with every day that follows, and it will not end until this regime stands alone. With that, I welcome your questions.
I believe that's called having a little patriot shutout. And we here at the Astrolabe are big fans of patriot shutouts from our great Treasury Secretary. Now, notice how the questioning is done here, and I have to admit, I haven't watched lots of these of Bessent doing these and taking questions and everything, but I did notice that you'll see here he looks down at his notes in front of him and he calls specific people. The first one is David at Reuters. So he already had a list of the people that he was going to answer questions from, and then he takes a couple of random ones from the audience. But I'd love to know what the thinking was in choosing who he named first.
David from Reuters.
Hi, thanks, Secretary. One of the most powerful tools you have at your disposal is the ability to impose secondary sanctions on banks and financial institutions that facilitate transactions for Iran.
Just to be clear, secondary sanctions just means that you have the primary sanctions, so they've sanctioned Iran. Secondary sanctions is we are sanctioning you, a third nation, because you're doing business with Iran.
Chinese banks have often been talked about being targeted, but we don't see any of those institutions targeted here. Is that something that is coming in this campaign, or is the very delicate trade truce with China something that could prohibit you from going that far and taking that very big step?
So remember, Xi is coming to the U.S. here in about a month or so, and they have this, like he says, this delicate trade truce. This is the first of a few questions where they seem to be kind of really focusing on China, and Bessent does not seem interested in focusing on China.
Truce with China, something that could prohibit you from going that far and taking that very big step.
We want to make clear here today that no one is above the reach of U.S. sanctions. That if they facilitate transactions and are part of the ecosystem that turns Iranian oil into money, into repression, they will be targeted. We find that the best way to engage with countries is through quiet diplomacy, and we are level setting with every country to tell them our expectations. We know who they are, they know who they are, so when the hammer of U.S. Treasury actions falls upon them, they will have no one to blame but themselves.
We know who they are, and they know who they are. Now again, I will say, this could all have been handled just privately, directly nation to nation. So the fact that he's going out and he's making this official, formal statement, blanket statement applicable to everyone is signal in itself.
Richard from CBS.
Thank you, sir.
He also seems like he's like, all right, I'm answering the questions because I know it's my obligation as Treasury Secretary to actually answer your questions, but I spit upon you. I have total contempt for you people.
Thank you. You said the president is calling world leaders with specific asks and that there's a defined timeline. Who is he calling and what are the asks?
We're not going to name names. That we've already seen some results, and that I am confident the president, as you all know, is quite persuasive, and we are following his calls up with calls from...
My president is the most persuasive.
Visits and calls from the State Department and from the U.S. Treasury, expecting them are telling the leaders, the countries, and the entities exactly what we expect and the timelines. And I would expect that very quickly, if they do not respond, then you will see the ramifications of their actions.
It's interesting. It says leaders of the countries and the entities. So this is not, they're not just, like you said, you can't just be ignorant. So if you're the leader of a country and there is this entity that is from your country that's engaged in this, you can't just say, oh, I didn't know that. But also the entities themselves. So there may be an entity that is set up to operate out of a given country, but it may not necessarily be like directly in alignment with the leadership of that country. But they're saying there's no excuse. You now have the obligation, leader of this country, to crack down on that entity. We're going to crack down on that entity. You're going to have the full might of the United States behind you in doing it. But this is your opportunity to step up and buy your way in through a show of good faith, cooperating with us on this, or you yourself will be pushed out of the city walls.
Can you say how far the timelines are?
Again, I'm not going to set timelines, but we do not have infinite patience here.
We do not have infinite patience here. I would say that means we're measuring this in maybe weeks at most, probably not months.
Jennifer?
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. Jennifer Schonberger with Yahoo Finance. You just said moments ago that no one is above U.S. sanctions. What specific secondary sanctions or penalties is Treasury prepared to levy against Chinese banks and shipping firms if they do not comply? And then secondly, as you look to take these unprecedented sanctions, you've also said that as the Iran conflict fades and oil prices recede, that will help bring down long-term bond yields. In the meantime, you have mentioned your toolkit, and I'm curious if you are looking at reducing auction sizes for longer-term dated Treasury debt going forward, and what other actions you may consider from that toolkit.
Yeah, well, why don't we work backwards? We issued the quarterly refunding announcement 2.5 weeks ago. We are going to continue with our regular program of auctions, so you will be hearing from us again at the beginning of next quarter. In terms of, as I said, every country, every entity should know that they should be prepared to face U.S. sanctions. And no one is above this. We are going to hold everyone accountable, and this is economic asphyxiation of this regime. And Jennifer, as I said, no one should test our resolve. So,
economic asphyxiation. Like he's not holding back rhetorically here.
Josh from New York Post.
And again, you see the emphasis on China here, and he's not in a headspace where he's emphasizing China.
You said you weren't going to name names, but there's been some reports that the United Arab Emirates is among some of the first nations to take seriously these words from the United States to cut off all business interactions with Iran. Is UAE leading the way in this respect?
I would think that the actions that they took last week were not coincident, but likely causal. And I would expect that we would see a broad array of countries taking similar actions as we continue our engagement.
Not coincident, but probably causal is like the most like Bessent way to phrase that ever. In other words, it wasn't a coincidence that they did that. They did that because we were privately putting pressure on them, and they acquiesced.
UAE have been very good partners and have taken the brunt of the Iranian attacks in the Gulf. And what have these countries gotten over the years from appeasing Iran? They were subject to violent attacks. While we were bombing Iran, they were bombing them. So it shows that with this regime, appeasement does not work. And on the other side, with this regime, trying to buy appeasement will no longer work in the eyes of the United States of America. And I want to emphasize that we are spreading out across the world as we speak, that you will see a wave of sanctions when you leave this meeting today, and you should expect that cadence to continue. And I would expect that you will see a major announcement of a financial institution being sanctioned by the end of this week. So
that's a very concrete prediction, and I've got something here. Matt Dines has his prediction for which institution that's going to be. We'll get to that in a sec.
Samira from Sky. Yep. No. No. Are you? No. I'm looking for Samira from Sky. No. Hi.
Some bitch from Al Jazeera is like, I can ask a question. Nope. You get ignored.
Does the United States and President Trump still want Canada to become a state? He did say that they're getting all the benefits of being a state without being one.
I think he would like Canada to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. They were offered quite a good deal last week. They chose to reject it. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Carney rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump platform. I believe he was more than 20 points behind, and he seems to have gone back to his old playbook. And I think one has to ask oneself, is he trying to benefit himself, the Liberal Party, or the Canadian people? Because they were offered a very good job.
This is just, he's so good at completely eviscerating someone from his own class in the terms that his own class would use to eviscerate someone. Is he trying to benefit himself, the Liberal Party, or the Canadian people? I'll have more on the Canada thing on a future episode.
Yep.
Thank you, Secretary Bessent. If I could shift to bond yields quickly. We saw them tick down today after some turbulence and going up last week. Can you tell us if there's any possibility that there'll be more bond buybacks anytime soon?
So this is the thing we've just been talking about.
Again, we haven't bought a single bond yet.
I forgot to mention that earlier, and I remember if Brent did, but this buyback program that he announced, they just announced that it's going to come. It hasn't actually even happened yet.
The next time we have an operation is September 9th. So we will see on September 9th. All right. One more. Let's see. You in the front.
You described this as an economic D-Day, but D-Day wasn't a threat of an invasion, and the U.S. didn't give a timeline to Germany. So why not impose the sanctions today?
I think this is actually a really good question. Like, if you're going to call it economic D-Day, well, what was economic D-Day? It was essentially a surprise invasion. So if you're going to call this an economic D-Day, then why are you not? You're actually saying, hey, we're giving you some advance notice that we're going to invade, essentially.
Well, we are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system? We believe that it is important to level.
You do see there's kind of a little equivocation here between the U.S. dollar system and the global financial system, which are really kind of one and the same.
Set and give people a cure period, but they should know that that will move very quickly and that we are serious. Secondary sanctions are a very powerful tool, and we here at Treasury, this is Gene Lang, the Acting Undersecretary for Terrorism Finance, and in the Terrorism Finance Department and at OFAC, the reason we are able to use secondary sanctions is because we do not take their use lightly. So we believe that a warning shot and a level set of expectations is appropriate, and if people do not want to meet our expectations, then we expect, and they should expect, that will leave the dollar system. Okay?
That last line.
I believe that a warning shot and a level set of expectations is appropriate, and if people do not want to meet our expectations, then we expect, and they should expect, that will leave the dollar system. Okay? Thank you all.
They should expect to leave the dollar system. And notice that he says terrorism finance. Like, I got to tell you, if you're an entity, if you're a bank, if you're a government, if you're a whatever, and you have the Treasury Terrorism Finance Investigation Unit bearing down on you, applying sanctions to you for funding terrorism, that's not a place that you want to be in. That is a bad thing to have associated with you. I think people have kind of grown to sort of like dismiss like what the U.S. Treasury is, but like if you had officials from the U.S. Treasury show up and knock on your door and say you are being investigated and sanctioned for funding terrorism, you are, I believe the technical industry term is fucked. So I don't know about you guys, but it seems pretty clear to me that this shot across the bow is not being directed at China. De-dollarization through total collapse, total strategy, bold strategy. Right. That's what he's saying. He's saying, you will be de-dollarized. And remember, I spent the first 3 hours of the show talking about what the implications of being de-dollarized actually are. What happens to you when you are de-dollarized? So they're telling you, if you are caught facilitating any sort of economic transaction whatsoever with Iran, you are going to be financially crippled. And we are going to take all of your assets. Now, a public political clash is emerging inside Iran over how the war with the United States should end. President Masoud Pezeshkian said last week that, quote, the war must come to an end at some point, arguing that Iran should seek to end it while preserving its strength and dignity. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf also warned that military power cannot be sustained if the economy continues to deteriorate, saying Iran must recognize the value of peace. So you should be able to kind of see the factions that are working their way out here. Apparently, Pezeshkian and Galibaf, as has been long reported by, or suspected, theorized by different guys I've shared here and talked about in the past. It's been a few months because I've kind of got tired of talking about the same thing over and over again. But it seems pretty clear that Galibaf and Pezeshkian are on the more U.S.-friendly side of this versus the more, I guess you'd say, radical, hardliner, militant IRGC. Now, Fars news agency, a media outlet closely associated with the IRGC, has openly challenged that position. In a sharply worded article titled, "Mr. President, How Should We End the War?" Fars argued that Iran did not start the conflict and should not speak as if ending it were Tehran's responsibility. It said calls to end the war risk signaling weakness, encouraging more U.S. pressure and potentially another attack. The dispute points to a widening divide between elected civilian leaders who are stressing the economic costs of the war and the need for a political exit, and hardline forces that argue compromise would reward Washington and weaken Iran's position. Pezeshkian and Galibaf are not calling for surrender. Both have framed diplomacy as something Iran should pursue without humiliation, but the Fars response shows that even publicly discussing an end to the war is now becoming a point of contention inside the Iranian establishment. This is Pezeshkian here on the right. Here's Galibaf on the left. And Bessent said Iran's leadership is admitting what the world can now see. The pressure is working. President Masoud Pezeshkian acknowledged Iran's economic shortages, saying the war must come to an end at some point. Galibaf, Iran's parliamentary speaker, was even more direct. Quote, "No matter how much military power we have, if people are hungry and we don't have financial circulation, economic growth, and domestic production, we will not endure." This is the Speaker of Parliament. Under President Trump, Treasury will continue to sever every economic lifeline sustaining this regime until Tehran stands alone. And I like the the edits they did here of Pezeshkian and Galibaf looking very sad and dark. Now, this here as well, Iran Watcher says a massive corruption scandal is exploding inside the Islamic Republic as a senior Pezeshkian official admits that both regime factions are involved in a fuel smuggling racket worth billions. I wonder what sort of financial transactions the Treasury has been tracing. Esmail Sakhab Esfahani, a presidential deputy responsible for fuel optimization and strategic energy management, says both major political wings of the regime are involved in fuel smuggling. He went even further, warning that if he tried to shut down their operations, quote, "they would smash the windows of my office." This is not small-time border smuggling. Iranian officials have estimated that roughly 20 to 30 million liters of fuel are smuggled every day. Moving fuel on that scale requires organized access to distribution, storage, transportation, and border networks. The economics are staggering. Iran sells heavily subsidized fuel domestically for a fraction of regional prices, creating an enormous arbitrage opportunity potentially worth billions of dollars annually. So what he's suggesting here is that there are Iranian politicos who are purchasing that fuel at the heavily subsidized domestic price and then reselling it and capturing the difference. Now, a senior government official is effectively saying politically connected networks inside the Islamic Republic are feeding from it and are powerful enough to threaten the officials tasked with stopping them. Meanwhile, ordinary Iranians are told shortages, deficits, and economic misery are entirely the product of sanctions. The regime subsidizes the fuel with public money, connected networks allegedly siphon it out of the country for enormous profits, and Iranians are left with the shortages in the bill. This is not corruption around the edges of the Islamic Republic. It is corruption embedded inside the system itself. And Matt Dine said public admission from a senior official that a criminal operation that's absorbed politicians from both sides in Iran has been siphoning profits away from the nationalized oil industry via exports sourced at the low subsidized prices meant for the domestic economy. If there's ever going to be an inflection to the situation in Iran internally, you'd think this would be a catalyst. You know, there's a whole lot of people out there who really, for the sake of their own souls, they owe a big giant, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, Donald Trump was right." Unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to happen for a lot. But for those who do decide to admit that they were wrong and Donald Trump is right, Much respect. And then Dine says, in light of Bessent's telegraphing yesterday of sanctions on a major financial institution, odds-on favorite is the Bank of Kunlun, a Xinjiang-based bank operating as a heavily involved conduit to Iran's oil exports to China. This name will have zero name recognition with the U.S. population, but the intended audience of people where it matters will know. Link to a 2018 Reuters exclusive below. Also, remember D-Day was an invasion. In invoking an economic D-Day, Bessent is suggesting a beachhead to project and disrupt the enemy's interior logistics and supply lines. I would not be surprised if disrupting the operating oil export ring in Iran that's tied up members of its political class, described in the OP below, is part of this operation. And he's referring to that, the thing I just talked about this criminal racket here. So, another person who I think deserves a lot of credit for sticking to his guns throughout all of this is the great Tom Luongo, because he has said for a long time that there are factions within the Iranian government who are working with the United States, essentially. And the United States is going to the extent that they prove themselves worthy, the United States is going to put them into power after helping them destroy their enemies domestically. So if both sides of the political aisle are compromised by this, then they actually themselves, if there's people who are compromised by this, but they don't want to be anymore because they see where this is going, they can actually get a path out. The United States can offer them a golden bridge. We will protect you. We will enshrine your power within Iran upon the completion of a deal with us, just like Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. Yeah, Zoomer Dylan, Luongo has been right on the Iran thing for almost a year now. And all of us here at the Astrolabe deeply appreciate him for that. And that, now finally at the 3.5 hour mark, is all that I had prepared for you guys today. Please do support the Erickson cause, no matter when you're listening to this. We have a sick little boy in the house that I have to do my best to stay away from so that I don't take man-cold AIDS to ChudCon next weekend. But so say a prayer for the little guy. He is very, very distressed about being sick, and he thinks he's going to be stuck this way forever. He gets very, very weepy and pathetic when he has a man cold. And buddy, I relate, man. I cannot describe to you just how much I relate. So I told him that I would tell everybody on the show today to please say a prayer for Eastwood so that he feels better soon. And yeah, please continue to support the show. I'm going to be missing quite a few shows over the next couple of weeks as I drive up to ChudCon and spend the weekend there and then drive back. I'm going to try to do some live streams from the road. I did get confirmation today that I cannot get full self-driving on this particular Tesla, but I'm going to still try to set myself up to do a little bit of streaming. So keep an eye out for that. Please do continue to fill the Erickson coffers so we can keep paying our bills. There's a lot of outflow happening right now, and a lot more outflow set to come in the future. So we are deeply, deeply indebted to all of you for your support of our family and helping me continue to bring all this content to you guys. Little value for value transaction. Very, very grateful to all of you. So please do interact with the channel, like the stream, subscribe on YouTube, become a YouTube channel member, Kick subscriber, tips.kingpill.com, join the Kingpill Discord, kingpill.com, and I will be back. I don't know for sure if I'm going to do a show tomorrow. It is Wednesday, and I've got a lot of stuff I have to do, but also I need to make money. So I may end up doing a show tomorrow. I'm probably like, let's say 70-30 right now that I'll do a show tomorrow. So just be on the lookout for that. You can follow the Telegram channel, t.me/kingpilled, so you know when I'm going to go live. And yeah, I hope you guys have yourselves a very, very good night. Thank you for showing up and entertaining me and for all the financial contributions. I'll see you guys on the next Lab. Until then, I leave you with Hulk.
When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next president of the United States, enough was enough, and I said,